Hey guys! This is part 5 of What If Naruto Was the Son of the Greek Goddess Hera. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 21. Issei and Naruto stood across the field from each other ready for their spar. Naruto was dressed in his shinobi-style celestial bronze armor, and wielding his kanabo. Issei was wearing a cold iron mail hauberk with cold iron shows and wielded 2 cold iron gauntlets. From what Naruto could see, Issei's gauntlets had been reinforced to act as brass knuckles, and the fingers of the gauntlets were formed into sharp claws. They would no doubt give Issei a fair amount of flexibility on attack options, even if they did sacrifice the reach that a spear, axe, or even a sword could give. At the same time, Issei was eyeing Naruto's kanabo with concern. Cold iron was superior to celestial bronze similarly, if not quite as big of a gap to how regular iron was superior to bronze. The problem for Issei is that his armor was focused on defending against piercing and cutting attacks. It didn't do nearly as well against blunt force attacks. When one added in Naruto's almost ridiculous strength and the fact that Hera had reinforced the kanabo with seals, well, it didn't paint a very good picture to Issei. Issei still thought he could win, but he knew that a solid blow or two could hand the victory to Naruto. Roswise stood off to the side on the field and calmly looked at the 2 teens. She then called out, "The spar will begin when I say so. As agreed upon, you will be limiting yourselves to weapon skills with 1 weapon and innate physical abilities. The match will continue until first blood is drawn, one of you forfeits, or does something to disqualify them. Do you both understand the terms of this match?" Both teens nodded their heads. Roswise then said, "You may begin now." Both teens immediately assumed defensive postures and started circling each other. Normally in such a situation Naruto would have thrown some shuriken or kunai to distract Issei if he didn't want to use a bunch of Kage Bunshins. That was why when Roswise had suggested this spar to start off Naruto's 14th birthday party, Naruto had asked for the 1 weapon limit. Being the top fighter made it harder for Naruto to practice unpredictability in a fight unless he created challenges like this for him. The last thing Naruto wanted when he got back to Konoha was to find out his skills in a fight had degraded because he was so used to being on top. Having a bunch of new jutsus wouldn't be much good if he had forgotten how to fight an equal, or someone stronger than him. After several seconds of circling, Issei thought he saw an opening and rushed at Naruto. Just as Issei was about to strike, Naruto dodged the incoming swipe and swung his kanabo. Issei swerved away from the spiked bat, missing it by a hair's breadth. The perverted once recovered from avoiding Naruto's attack almost instantly, and started to circle around for another pass. Naruto saw his opponent's movements, and decided to switch to a more defensive stance. The fact that he wasn't used to fighting defensively made the spar more challenging and thus more fun. Besides, Issei's weapon choice dictated that he had to fight aggressively, and the fight might be over too quickly if both of them fought that way. Several times Issei circled around Naruto, attacked, barely escaped a counterattack, and retreated to a safe distance. However, it was quickly becoming apparent that Naruto was winning this spar. Issei was starting to breathe harder 10 minutes into the spar while Naruto was as fresh as a rose. By the 15-minute mark of this routine, Issei was starting to sweat. Finally, at the 20-minute mark, Issei fell to his knees panting for breath. "I yield," Issei called out in between labored breaths. Roswise called out in a calm voice, "Naruto Uzumaki wins by forfeiture." The Valkyrie calmly watched as Naruto walked over to her son and helped him to his feet. Once Issei was up, he and Naruto started to talk about their spar. The sight of the duo happily talking brought a small smile to Roswise's lips. Raising Issei had always been difficult for the Valkyrie because he was her first child and she had to raise him on Midgard. She couldn't raise Issei full-time in Asgard because of his mortal blood. Her beloved husband couldn't help out because of the public nature of his death when he was immortal. Both boys headed into the Haida household to change out of their armor. Once the boys were out of their armor, they got into the car so that Roswise could drive them over to Naruto's and Ms. Frizzle's house. Ms. Frizzle had wanted Naruto out of the house for a bit while she did some prep work for the birthday party. That's why the spar was at the Haida house. It was a simple 15-minute drive over to Naruto's house, and most of that time was simple because of them hitting so many traffic lights. Naruto started to frown about halfway to his house. For some reason his danger sense was starting to act up and Naruto couldn't figure out why. None of the perimeter alert seals he had set up around town had gone off. While they weren't perfect, they were based on the same barrier seals that surrounded Konoha. Besides, Roswise and Issei weren't showing signs that they were sensing any danger, which means that there shouldn't be any danger. Roswise parked her car in the driveway and the trio got out. They headed to the backyard where Ms. Frizzle was setting things up for an afternoon picnic party. Arnold, Arianwen, Sklep, Gerd, Fjolnir, and a half-dozen different nature spirits were already in the backyard. Hera appeared in the backyard in a swirl of leaves just as Naruto passed through the backyard gates. Naruto smiled when he saw his mother, and immediately ran up to give her a hug. After hugging Hera, Naruto walked over and gave his grandmother and uncle a hug as well. He then turned to look at Sklep, who quickly held up his hands saying, "No hugs for me, birthday boy." Naruto rolled his eyes and offered his hand to his perverted teacher. The coyote spirit quickly accepted the offered hand with a strong handshake. After that handshake, Naruto went to all of the guests and shook their hands while thanking them for showing up. Unlike most people, especially teenagers, at their birthday party, Naruto didn't pay attention to the small pile of presents for him sitting off to the side. For him, the presents were not nearly as important as having someone to spend time with. Naruto smiled at everyone and said, "I'm grateful you all decided to come to my party today." Hera smiled and spoke up. "There is one person who hasn't yet arrived, Naruto." For some inexplicable reason, Naruto got the sense of impending danger. This sense of danger only got worse as Gerd frowned and spoke up, "That strange daughter. I know of someone who said she'd be at this party. I didn't know that you had talked to her." A chill ran down Naruto's back when he heard two familiar voices call out, "Happy birthday, Naruto." The voices started out friendly and cheerful, but they quickly gained a tense edge to them. Naruto quickly looked around and saw Artemis standing at one side of the fence, and Sunna was standing at the other. Both goddesses had a present in their arms and were giving each other heated glares for some reason Naruto could not fathom. Safely to the side, the other party guests nervously watched as the two goddesses started walking closer to Naruto. It was obvious to everyone else that both Sunna and Artemis had picked up on the other's interest in the oblivious blonde, and they were not happy about it. While Naruto greeted both of his friends, Hera muttered to her mother, "This could get ugly." Gerd hurriedly replied in a sarcastic tone, "What was your first clue?" Sklep pulled out a bowl of popcorn and a beer from a seal and started to giggle perversely. It was always good to see two girls fighting over a guy in his book. The fact that he would get to see two goddesses fighting made things even better in Sklep's book. Now the only thing that could make this better in Sklep's mind was if the goddesses somehow ended up in a mud ring and the fates guaranteed that some boobs would be exposed. Artemis and Sunna walked closer together with Naruto in the middle until the three were in arm's length of each other. In an eerie unison both goddesses turned to Naruto and demandingly said, "Naruto, who is your friend?" Everyone except for Naruto could hear the sarcastic quotation marks in the goddesses' voices when they used the word friend. Naruto obliviously replied in his usual cheerful tone, "Artemis, this is Sunna, the Norse goddess of the sun. She's a good friend of mine who has been taking some time to teach me about monster threats here in the north. Sunna, this is Artemis, the Greek goddess of moon and hunt. She's also a very good friend of mine, and she's been volunteering at Camp Half-Blood these past couple of summers as an archery teacher. I'm sure both of you will be great friends once you get to know each other." Both goddesses looked each other in the eye, and the onlookers would later swear they saw lighting cross between the goddesses' eyes. It was an understatement to say that both goddesses did not the fact that another goddess who was friendly with Naruto was also after him romantically. Artemis tensely offered Sunna her hand and said, "A pleasure to meet you, Sunna." The Greek goddess didn't understand why she was so hostile to Sunna. Sure, she was annoyed that someone was trying to take Naruto away from her. However, she shouldn't be this enraged about it, should she? Her tentative betrothal to Naruto was only conditional if he wasn't able to find a way for all of them to get out of her oath unscathed, so someone else's interest in him shouldn't be that annoying. Why should it bother her if someone wanted her friend after everything was taken care of with the oath? Subconsciously, Artemis had been suppressing Hera's warning and also ignoring Naruto's suggestions on how he might be able to get them out of their oaths. Naruto wasn't the only one at the party who had a blind spot to matters of the heart. Sunna took the offered hand and gave it an unfriendly strong squeeze in return. In a challenging tone she replied, "The pleasure will be mine, Artemis." Sunna was sizing up her competition, and she was not impressed. Artemis might be a potentially troublesome rival to the Acer goddess if she put her full effort into courting Naruto. All she needed to do was get Naruto out of his admirably infuriating oath, and then it would be no contest for her. The solar goddess had never lost when it counted before, and she was not about to start now. Hera and Gerd looked at each other and nodded their heads. Enough was enough. Both goddesses moved to the younger member of their respective pantheons. They quickly grabbed Artemis and Sunna's attention away from each other. Hera and Gerd then led Artemis and Sunna to opposite sides of the backyard to calm them down. Naruto was confused by this turn of events. Most of the other party guests breathed out sighs of relief, and Olympus started to pout. He wanted hair pulling and clawing with a slight chance of revealing skin, damn it. It was a chilly November morning as Naruto, wearing the buckskin jacket Artemis had gotten for him, saddled up Bucephalus for a trip. Things had eventually calmed down after Sunna and Artemis's near brawl at his birthday party a month ago. Hera had quickly gotten Artemis to agree to keep the existence of other pantheons a secret from Olympus. She could easily imagine all of the problems many of the gods would cause if they found out that some other god shared their domain in another part of the world. After a few days, things seemed to settle out for Naruto, as they always did after a major event occurred around him. Things stayed mostly the same for the young half-blood. The only changes he saw were that both Artemis and Sunna had started spending more time with him. Not that Naruto minded this change, as he was all for spending more time with his friends. Once Bucephalus was saddled, Naruto went back into the house and grabbed a large package wrapped in a protective blanket. Naruto wished that he could just seal the package up, but his mother had advised him against doing so for this trip. He gently placed the package on Bucephalus's back behind his saddle and then securely fastened the package onto his steed. Naruto got on his steed after he double-checked everything and led the 8-legged horse out of the backyard. The duo quickly headed out of town and then kicked it up to supersonic speed. A little over an hour later, Naruto reached his destination of 8 Cave in Washington. Naruto used his best genjutsu along with his abilities to manipulate the mist to hide his and Bucephalus's presences from the mortal visitors. Even though he was invisible, Naruto carefully led Bucephalus so that his steed didn't touch any of the other visitors in the cave. Bucephalus soon found an empty section of the lava tube, and Naruto felt a strange surge of energy from his steed. That surge signaled Bucephalus's magic, activating the horse's most powerful ability. The cave around Naruto immediately gained a second chamber, which he promptly directed Bucephalus to enter. This tunnel had a very steep grade, but Bucephalus was easily able to keep his footing. After about 10 minutes of Bucephalus trotting, the magically made lava tunnel opened up into a massive underground chamber half filled with black water. Naruto gently patted his steed's neck to reassure the now uncertain horse. Now refilled with confidence, Bucephalus reared back and then dashed onto the black water. Bucephalus and Naruto took off across the black water at a full gallop. The cavern around the horse and rider kept on getting larger the longer they traveled over the water. Then, without warning, the cavern grew to enormous proportions, revealing that the water Bucephalus was galloping on was a river as wide as the Mississippi. A large black barge soon came into view as Naruto and Bucephalus continued traveling down the river. Horse and rider came closer to the barge as they traveled down the river. Naruto winced as he heard a storm of cussing come from the barge. "What the Tartarus do you think you're doing, you no-good brat? Union regulations clearly state that I'm the only one allowed to operate a crossing business over the river Styx. I've paid my dues to the Thonic Union and I've been to every union meeting. I know you're not in the membership." When the other members hear about what you've done, Naruto managed to ignore the rest of Karen's rants and threats as he headed to the other side of the Styx. Karen's rants and threats were rather educating to Naruto as he approached the underworld proper. He had been wondering why Hades' realm was so pathetic relative to the various afterlives in the north. In the north you had Valhalla for the heroic warrior Einherjar, along with Freya's field of Folkvanger for the Einherjar that came from regular soldiers and warriors. Then you had the holy mountain of Hegefjell, where regular and undistinguished mortals simply lived again like they had in life. Finally you had Hell's dreary Helheim, which contained those who lived mostly bad lives, with the subsection of Nastran reserved for the truly wicked. That complicated system seemed better to Naruto than what existed in the West. With his uncle's realm, if you were really good or heroic, you got Elysium, which was supposedly between Folkvanger and Hegefjell in terms of existence. If you were wicked, you got the Fields of Punishment. Otherwise, you went to Asphodel, which in Naruto's mind might as well be part of the Fields of Punishment. Losing one's memories and identity to just float around for all eternity seemed pretty hellish to him. Why his uncle, who as Caleb admitted was one of the hardest working gods if not the hardest working in the Olympian West, had let his realm end up like this had boggled Naruto's mind. However, the fact that the other gods and goddesses of the underworld had formed a union explained everything wrong with the current condition of the West's afterlife. Cerberus started walking towards Naruto, growling all three of his heads. Naruto calmly looked up at the monstrous three-headed Rottweiler, and ignored Karen's jeers about how he was about to be eaten. As soon as Cerberus got within one body length of Naruto, the half-blood shinobi called out, "Back off." To emphasize this, Naruto mixed some of the Kyuubi's chakra in with his own killing intent. Chiron was horrified to watch as Cerberus stopped in his tracks, and then his three heads looked at each other. Naruto continued to use the mix of his and the Kyuubi's chakra as he calmly led Bucephalus closer to the underworld's guard dog. In a clear voice, Naruto commanded, "Step aside, Cerberus, because I have no quarrel with you or your master. So step aside, because I have no desire to slay you if I do not have to do so." Cerberus lowered his heads in submission and quickly started to back away from Naruto had Bucephalus. Once Naruto was past Cerberus, he headed towards Hades' palace. Several dozen monsters moved in to attack him during this journey, but they all turned away as they got closer and felt the killing intent Naruto was radiating. It was difficult for Naruto to keep up his little field of killing intent and just use the barest hint of the Kyuubi's chakra. However, the choice was simple for Naruto, as the alternative to this would be to kill any monster he encountered. Several of the monsters turned back sooner than the others. Those were monsters that had previously been killed by Naruto, and they knew he could quickly kill them if they challenged him. Naruto cancelled his killing intent field when he got to Hades' palace and dismounted Bucephalus. He then unfastened the package his steed had been carrying and picked it up. Naruto walked up the palace steps and watched as the palace door opened up in front of him. Once the doors were open, Naruto walked through them and headed to the throne room where his aunt and uncle were waiting. Hades looked down at his nephew and said, "You have a lot of nerve trespassing into my domain, Naruto Uzumaki. Why have you come here before your time?" Normally, Hades would have thrown in some more threats like he usually did when a half-blood came to his domain on a quest. The reason he didn't this time is because those half-bloods never brought something to him when they came on a quest to get something from him. Persephone was also curious as to what her daughter's ward was doing in the underworld. With a smile, Naruto replied, "I came here to deliver you some gifts to celebrate your anniversary." Both the king and queen of the underworld stared at Naruto with dumbfounded looks. Almost no one celebrated their wedding anniversary outside of the two of them. Occasionally Hera and Hestia would send them a gift. But that was only if Hera wasn't steamed over Zeus's latest infidelity, or if Hestia didn't have to put out an argument in the family. Naruto unwrapped the package and revealed 4 fluorescent tubes, some seed packages, and a small book. The shinobi half-blood then started to explain his gifts. "I figured that you both had almost everything you could want, so I tried to find something practical for each of you. The fluorescent tubes and the seeds are for you, Persephone. The tubes are supposed to mimic sunlight, so I figured you could use them to add more variety to your garden down here. The book is for you, Hades. It contains notes on how a god or goddess can create multiple copies of themselves and later remember everything the copies did. The minor god I got it from used it for less than noble purposes, but I figured it could be useful for you with all of the work you have down here." Both Hades and Persephone summoned some skeleton servants, which quickly picked up the gifts and took them to the royal couple's private chamber. The divine couple looked at each other for a few moments, and then nodded their heads. They then turned to look at Naruto, and Hades calmly spoke, "Thank you for your gifts, my nephew. My wife and I accept them in the spirit they were given. I would offer you something to eat, but I do not have any refreshment from the living world." Naruto shrugged and replied, "That's okay, uncle. I came here to deliver those presents to you too. Happy anniversary, and I will see you two again one day." With that said, Naruto left his aunt and uncle to depart their realm. The winter solstice found Naruto in Asgard staying with his grandmother Gerd, as it was a massive party for residents of Asgard. There had been feasting the likes of which made the ordinary feasts of Valhalla look like a beggar's dinner. Balder gave away wonderful gifts to all of the housecarls personally sworn to him and his father Odin. Over a dozen of the best metal and rock bands had been booked to entertain everyone all night long. Much to Naruto's surprise, Sunna had roped him into joining her for a few dances during the party. After around 1 a.m., Naruto had stumbled back to Gerd's house and crashed on the floor. The fact that Naruto had made it to the proper house was a major achievement, as most of the partygoers had crashed on the streets of Asgard. Naruto slowly started to wake up around 9 a.m. when the sunlight moved straight onto his face. The sunlight felt friendly, and it was almost like it was caressing his face as he woke up. This was very different from the rather harsh sunlight Naruto was used to in the morning when he was in the West. That feeling faded as Naruto slowly woke up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Once Naruto was up, he headed for the kitchen and grabbed some milk to drink. He took a quick glance outside and then diverted his gaze. There were several dozen Einherjar and Valkyries spread out in the streets, obviously recovering from an instant drunk sparring match. For a few of the Einherjar and Valkyries, the sparring match had apparently digressed into a drunken orgy. Naruto focused on forgetting about the scene outside and headed over to the cabinet with the hangover medicine in it. Rapid regenerative abilities don't really matter when you've had several barrels of mead because you will wake up with a headache. Naruto quickly downed a dose of the medicine and sighed in relief as the dwarves mining in his head were evicted. He then put the medicine away and thought about what he should have for breakfast. Waiting for Gerd was pointless as she was with Frigga. The last Naruto remembered seeing his grandmother was her sharing an intense lip lock with Asgard's queen as the duo drunkenly headed to Frigga's chambers. Whatever happened later between the two, Naruto didn't know, and he didn't want to know. After a few seconds, Naruto decided to have some cereal and quickly got a bowl ready for himself. There was a knock on the door just as Naruto was about to sit down and eat. The young demigod blinked his eyes in surprise as he didn't figure anyone else would be up at this time since he left the party early. Naruto quickly got up and rushed to the front door. He opened the door and was shocked to see his mother standing there looking extremely upset. "Mom!" Naruto yelled out as he pulled Hera into a hug. Hera was surprised by the hug, but happy to have her son's simple happiness and love at being near her. It helped to take the edge off of her anger. After a few seconds, Naruto pulled back from his hug while still holding his mother's arms. He looked up and saw the look in her eyes and frowned. "Come inside, Mom, and tell me what's wrong." Naruto stepped aside and let Hera enter Gerd's hall. Once inside, he led her to the family room and sat down next to her on the couch. Hera took a deep breath and said with rage in her voice, "Someone stole my diadem." Naruto blinked his eyes for a second in confusion before they widened in shock. Hera's diadem was her symbol of power and denoted her status as the Queen of Olympus. Naruto wasn't used to thinking about it because she never wore it when she spent time with him. That was because when Hera was spending time with Naruto, she was doing it as his mother and not as the Queen of Olympus. Naruto blurted out, "Who could do such a thing, and how did this happen?" Anger started to grow in Naruto at the thought of someone insulting his mother like this. There was an edge in Hera's voice as she said, "I don't know who did this, Naruto. It happened sometime during the winter solstice meeting, although I cannot narrow the time frame more than that. However, I promise that I will make whoever is responsible for this insult pay dearly. I've already sent out several gods and goddesses to look for the thief before the trail grows too cold. I've also summoned Thetis' son and the legacy on his CSI team to Olympus in order to process the crime scene. They should be able to find more clues as to the thief's identity if he or she is not caught." Hera was pulled into a hug by Naruto as he tried to comfort his mother. After a minute he said, "Is there anything I can do to help find your diadem, Mom? I may not be the best tracker around, but there must be something I can do to help." Naruto's simple desire to help her brought a small smile to Hera. She knew from the tiny fragment of herself sealed into the Kyuubi's prison that Naruto solely wanted to help her because it was the right thing to do. That was extremely rare in a half-blood because almost all who would volunteer to help a god or goddess did so out of desire for fame and glory. Hera sighed and replied, "I cannot think of anything you can do to help me at this time, Naruto. However, I may need you to go after the thief if he or she enters an area that the gods and goddesses looking for my diadem cannot enter. Don't worry, Mom. Just tell me where and say the word. I'll do everything in my power to get your diadem back for you." Chapter 22. Detectives Mac Taylor and Stella Bonacera walked into the Empire State Building and headed to the security guard at the elevator. Detective Taylor manipulated the mist slightly so that no one paid attention to the two CSI detectives. He then calmly spoke to the guard. "We're Detectives Mac Taylor and Stella Bonacera here to review our findings with the Olympians." The guard nodded his head and replied, "The elevator is ready for you. Remember, Olympus is on the 600th floor and be careful. Everyone up there is on edge over this crime." Both detectives nodded their heads and got onto the elevator to Olympus. To their surprise, Stella's grandmother Athena was waiting at the elevator when the door opened. Athena smiled for a second at the sight of her granddaughter before she slipped into her usual business manner. Follow me and stay close. Until this crisis is solved, all half-blood activities on Olympus are under even greater restrictions. Athena led the half-blood and legacy on a brisk pace through Olympus on the shortest path to the council chamber. As soon as the trio entered the council chamber, the two semi-mortals bowed to Hera and Zeus's thrones while Athena rejoined the other 11 members of the council. Hera gave the two detectives a neutral look and commanded, "What have your investigations turned up?" She was annoyed at having to depend on half-bloods to find her diadem, but none of the gods or goddesses who had looked for the thief had found anything. Even Artemis had lost the thief's trail when he or she had entered the subway. Mac handed his briefcase to Stella so that she could hold it while he got some things from it. He closed the briefcase after retrieving the necessary documents, and let Stella handle it. The half-blood detective turned to face the Olympians and calmly said, "This is a report of everything Stella and I have found in our investigation of the crime scene where Lady Hera's diadem was stolen. Please keep in mind that some of the evidence was contaminated before we were able to process the scene. Also, some of the divine aspects of crime scene have reduced the accuracy of the lab results on some of the tests. I will clarify when these instances have occurred. The most important and unquestionable piece of evidence recovered is several drops of blood left by the perpetrator on the pedestal where Lady Hera left her diadem. From the amount and location, we can infer that the thief cut himself on the decorative parts of the pedestal during the theft. An analysis of the blood shows that it belongs to a male half-blood with a divine father. Unfortunately, the minute ichor traces in the blood that allow us to determine this have also prevented the lab's machines from narrowing the results any further." In calm professional tone, Mac continued to give his report. "It is important to note that there is a steady, although faint trail of blood following the thief's path of escape until he stops at a fountain in one of the private gardens half a block from where the winter solstice gathering was being held. After stopping at the fountain, the thief either healed himself or bandaged the cut, as the blood trail does not continue." Mac calmly showed the assembled gods and goddess an enlarged photo of 3 pieces of sea green thread. These fibers were found at the fountain. We also found 2 more identical fibers further down the path of thief's escape route. It is Stella and my belief that these 5 threads came to their location through secondary transfer. That is, the thief came into contact with someone or something made of these thread, picking a few up on his clothes and then depositing them at their found locations. A second set of female shoeprints by the fountain of roughly the same age as the thief's footprints makes it highly likely that the fibers were there as a result of the thief coming into contact with an accomplice's dress or purse. Athena interrupted Mac and inquired, "Are you implying that a goddess helped to commit this crime?" Stella spoke up at this time. "That is not what Detective Taylor or I am saying, Lady Athena." Athena's steel gaze softened slightly as her granddaughter spoke. "What we are saying is that there was an unknown female who encountered the thief while he was at the fountain." Mac was about to explain this next part, but the thief's shoeprints were lighter after he left the fountain. This evidence suggests the thief handed the unknown female something after meeting her. Based on Detective Taylor and my past experiences with crimes, we think that the item in question handed over was the diadem, and that the fiber transfer happened when the exchange of the item occurred. The fibers were found to not have a mortal origin in the lab tests. This fact, in addition to the fountain's location relative to gathering, makes it unlikely that unknown female is a half-blood. However, it does not rule out that possibility. Mac then resumed the explanation after Stella looked at him to continue. "Given the recovered evidence, we have determined the following likely chain of events. The thief stole the diadem and went to the fountain. There he handed the diadem over to his associate and left Olympus. The associate returned to the winter solstice gathering. This was probably done to establish an alibi and to sneak the diadem out at a different time. Anything further than that is pure speculation on our end." Hera calmly said, "Your efforts in solving this crime are appreciated, detectives. Give your findings to Athena so that the council can review your findings again at a later date. She will then escort you out of Olympus." The detectives hadn't discovered everything like she had secretly hoped, but they had done far better than she expected. Their investigation had discovered evidence that the gods and goddesses looking for the thief had missed. She was now one step closer to retrieving her diadem and making the guilty parties pay for this grievous insult. After the detectives left the council room, Aphrodite spoke up. "You know, those fibers matched the dress Amphitrite was wearing during the winter solstice meeting." Everyone on the council turned to look at Aphrodite, who started to get defensive. "What? Am I the only one to notice that Amphitrite was the only person wearing something with that particular shade of sea green at the party?" Anyone who pays any attention to fashion should have picked up on it, as it was an absolute fashion don't. While Aphrodite started to complain about Amphitrite's fashion sense, Hera's mind was turning over the facts in her head. The thief had an accomplice who had left and rejoined the party. Amphitrite had left the party for about 20 minutes to visit the ladies' room. That was plenty of time for her to get to the fountain and return to the party. She was the only one that had something on with the same exact color as the thief's accomplice. As the queen of the ocean, Amphitrite could have easily smuggled something out of Olympus. Amphitrite had also been sore over Hera's takeover of Olympus because it solidified her position as the best queen of the realms. Before the takeover, Amphitrite had routinely used Zeus's god-whoring ways to argue that Hera wasn't much of queen. Sure, Poseidon had cheated on Amphitrite from time to time, but his cheating was almost nothing compared to Zeus's. The more Hera thought about her sister-in-law, the more the theft of her diadem made sense, and the more enraged Hera became. A meadow in Alaska rang with the clash of cold iron on cold iron. Sunna and Naruto were sparring in the field, with the goddess using a poleaxe and the aunts using 2 throwing knives. The throwing knives were part of a set of 21 knives she had given him for his birthday. Both combatants were sweating heavily, even though it was chilly spring morning, as they had been sparring for an hour already. At the moment, the blade of Sunna's poleaxe was being blocked by Naruto's knives, which he held in a crossed position. Sunna quickly pulled her poleaxe back and then jabbed with the spear-like point. Naruto quickly deflected the thrust with one knife as he threw the other at Sunna's feet. The goddess immediately started to pull her poleaxe back when she saw the knife flying. There was a flash of light when the knife hit the ground, causing Sunna to immediately lash out with a kick to the flash. Her kick was blocked by Naruto's raised forearm, with the impact causing a small crack like the sound of a whip. Naruto retaliated by quickly swiping Sunna's arm that was holding her poleaxe with the knife in his hand. Once Sunna had been cut, Naruto dropped to the ground and grabbed the thrown knife. As he was grabbing the knife, he also kicked Sunna's knee with all his might. A sickening crack was heard from Sunna's knee, and the goddess let out a hiss of pain. She fell to the ground and called out, "I yield, Naruto. The match goes to you. Now go and get that apple one brought from Iden." Sunna sat on the ground clutching her broken knee as Naruto ran to the goddess's motorcycle, which was parked on the other side of the meadow. As Naruto ran, he passed by his kanabo, which Sunna had yanked from his grip halfway through the spar and ignored it for the moment. He opened on the bags on the bike and grabbed the golden red apple inside. Naruto then rushed back to Sunna and handed her the apple. She promptly took a bite out of the apple, causing her knee to repair itself. Once Sunna was healed from the spar, she pocketed the apple and smiled at Naruto. "That was a great spar, Naruto. I hadn't realized that I had neglected my mid-range training so much that I had become that rusty. We'll have to arrange to have more spars like this in the future." Naruto gulped and replied, "Sure, Sunna." The Norse sun goddess was extremely good when it came to fighting. Fighting her in a simple taijutsu and weapons match had pushed him to the limit. She had nearly won the spar half a dozen times. Naruto had only managed to stay in the match because Sunna had allowed him to use the Horatian as a handicap for herself. At least she didn't want a full-fledged spar, because Naruto knew that he wouldn't have had a chance to win such a match. He was good, but Sunna and the Aesir were on a completely different level to him. It was almost impossible for someone to win against someone thousands of years of near-constant battle experience, and the power of one of the middle-level bijou that they controlled perfectly. The fact that the Aesir were extremely flexible in how they used their power as opposed to the bijou who mostly used brute force only increased the danger. Still, Naruto found the spar with Sunna to be great fun, even though she had made him feel like a fresh genin at times. He got such a rush from a high-level battle when other lives were not on the line. The fact Sunna pushed him to the limits of his abilities, even though they weren't his primary battle abilities, made the rush even greater. Naruto got a similar rush when he sparred with CSI Olympus, but that rush was mitigated by several factors. 1. He had battled the coyote spirit so often that he knew the spirit's abilities and style. The second reason was that CSI Olympus constantly made perverted comments involving Naruto and Sunna or Artemis that it pissed Naruto off. Sunna laid back on the meadow, stretching her arms and folding her hands behind her head. A small smirk appeared on her face as she watched Naruto notice how her sweat-drenched shirt clung to her body as she stretched. The faint blush that appeared on Naruto's face as moved his eyes to not stare made her mood soar. It was great for her to know she could get Naruto's hormones pumping without causing him to lose his respect for women. Sunna smiled as the smirk faded and asked, "How goes your search for Connor's great-granddaughter, Naruto?" A small frown appeared on Naruto's face, and his blush rapidly faded. I've run into an unexpected snag, Sunna. Someone has cast a very powerful spell on all the records of Connor's mortal family, starting with his granddaughter. No matter which way I try to go at it, this damn spell kicks in, making it impossible for me to read or hear anything in the mortal records about Connor's great-granddaughter or her immediate family. I've tried all of the usual anti-genjutsu tricks, and I've tried to manipulate the mist to no effect. That's troubling news, Naruto, Sunna said with concern. The only way such a spell could be cast is if a god or goddess used a great deal of power. It's also rather concerning given that most gods and goddesses in the West will not spend so much effort to protect a mortal unless he or she is very important to them. Naruto sighed and replied, Connor said that his great-granddaughter would be in great danger because of her connection with the ocean. The fact that such a spell was cast on her family after my mother formally accused an Amphitrite of orchestrating the theft of her diadem is troubling. It's unlikely that these events are unconnected. The best-case scenario I can think of is that she or a close relative is very important to an important deity in Atlantis. Unfortunately, that scenario implies that Atlantis is prepping itself for further tension with Olympus. And Amphitrite's refusal to give an oath on the river Styx to clear her name as mom requests and Uncle Poseidon's rising temper over the accusations against an Amphitrite have driven up the tension between the two cities higher than it's been in millennia. Worst-case scenario is that she or a close family member did steal mom's diadem on an Amphitrite's orders. If that's true, then all bets are off as this situation explodes. 3, 4, 5 You win by a landslide, collect 12 fame, which makes it your turn, Naruto. Artemis gave Naruto a small smile as she tallied her fame points, and then handed him the dice. Since Naruto's school was currently on spring break, Artemis had invited him over to spend some time with her and the hunters. Technically speaking, Naruto had been in the hunters' camp every week since he had left Camp Half-Blood thanks to his Kage Bunshins. The hunters, like the seasonal campers, had been receiving scrolls with sealed Kage Bunshins in them so that Naruto could be with them for continual training. Naruto rolled the dice, moved his token to the start of the space career, and then shifted the tokens so that he could go into the space career again. He paused for a second as one of his clones dispersed to give him a status report on the hunter's training session. After Naruto absorbed the clone's memories, he reached over and handed the dice to Caroline, taking care to avoid her raised leg. Caroline broke her leg yesterday in a hunting accident, which was why she was at the table instead of doing Nishu training. Caroline rolled and frowned as her token had to stay in unemployment. She handed the dice over to Zoe, who was there officially to help Caroline if she needed anything. It wouldn't be proper if Artemis waited on the wounded hunter now, would it? Unofficially, Zoe was there at the other hunter's request to keep an eye on Naruto during his time with Artemis. Sadly for Zoe, her roll landed her on a square that caused her to lose her next turn. Zoe frowned slightly as she handed the dice over Artemis. The goddess smiled as she got the dice from her friend and lieutenant. Sitting among her family playing a game with some of her family and Naruto was enjoyable to Artemis. It let her escape from the trouble brewing between Olympus and Atlantis while also putting her mind at ease over her concerns with marrying Naruto. His agreement to marry her had ended the terror that had plagued her for years since she found out about his existence. But it didn't erase her apprehension over the fact of having a boyfriend or a future husband. That other northern goddess's interest in Naruto also added to her concerns. Artemis rolled one of the dice and landed on a space which gave her enough happiness to complete her winning formula. Everyone at the table congratulated Artemis on winning. Then Zoe and Naruto picked up the game. Artemis spoke just as Naruto was putting the careers board back in its box. Naruto, would you please join me for a walk? The goddess turned to Zoe and spoke before Zoe could say a thing. Thank you for looking after Caroline while she's recovering, Zoe. I trust that she will remain in your excellent care while Naruto and I go for our walk. Both Caroline and Zoe gave Artemis a resigned look before they gave Naruto a short, but fierce glare. Naruto ignored the glare since there was nothing personal about it. The hunters were merely trying to guard Artemis as they were supposed to do. In addition to being Artemis's friends, companions, and daughter figures, the hunters also served as her ceremonial guard, even though that role really wasn't needed given that she was a goddess. Still, one could no more blame the hunters for protecting Artemis than one could blame the ANBU for protecting Tsunade. Naruto finished putting the board game away and walked over to Artemis, who was getting out of her chair. The two of them walked out of the tent and saw half a dozen of Naruto's clones instructing the hunters on the basics of the Doton, Shinju Zanshu Jutsu. Artemis smiled as she saw how well her hunters were coming at learning jutsu. She then led Naruto out of the hunter's camp and into the surrounding forest. After a few minutes of silently walking together, Naruto spoke. I'm sorry, Artemis, that I haven't figured out a new possibility to free you from your oath. Artemis shot Naruto an amused look and replied in a slightly sarcastic tone. You do realize that most men consider the idea of marrying even a minor goddess to be an amazing blessing of the fates upon them. They would do the most difficult and foolishly dangerous quests they could think of in the silly hope that they might impress a goddess, or at least a nymph, to be their wife. And yet, here you are doing everything in your power to get out of a marriage with a major goddess that the goddess herself asked you do. I'm starting to wonder if I should take personal offense at this, Naruto. Instantly, Naruto started to nervously babble a defense against Artemis's little accusation. The more he babbled, the more tongue-tied he became, and Artemis's amusement at the situation increased. Finally, she started to giggle in amusement at Naruto's predicament, which caused him to pout. Artemis quickly contained her giggles and said, I'm sorry, Naruto, but our situation is a bit humorous if one looks at it from an outside perspective. I didn't realize it until one of my hunters pointed it out to me the other day. Naruto thought about what Artemis had just told him, and then nodded his head. From someone else's perspective, it might be hilarious that he was trying to get out of marrying a goddess. He gave her an amused look and said, I suppose from one point of view that our situation is funny. However, people who find our situation funny are forgetting one very critical fact that changes everything. You asked me to marry you because you wanted to protect your hunters, not because you wanted to be my wife. I'd have to be the world's biggest slime ball to not do my hardest to free you from having to marry against your will. A faint golden blush appeared on Artemis's cheeks when she heard those words. Very few men displayed such honor when put to the test. In the past, when Artemis found such men, she usually bestowed a minor blessing in hunting if they were woodsmen, or blessed their wives with easy births and healthy children. She preferred female company because of her station and past experiences, but she appreciated when a man could rise above the filth of his fellow males to become a person of integrity. Such men treated their wives with respect and raised their children properly. They also didn't abuse women, which made things easier and more peaceful for her. It was good for Artemis to remind herself from time to time that Naruto was one of those men, as it made her less skittish when it came to any sort of romantic-toned interactions with him. The couple walked in silence for a few minutes, simply enjoying each other's company and the scenery of the forest. During the walk, Naruto's hand brushed up against Artemis's and he instinctively grabbed it. Artemis was naturally surprised by Naruto's action, but quickly found that she enjoyed holding his hand. They eventually stopped walking when they came to a small pond where a family of ducks were swimming. Artemis's eyes were drawn to the ducklings and her thoughts started to turn to the future. The ducklings reminded her that when she married she would be expected to have children of her own. Besides the fact that it was expected that wife would bear her husband's children, her position as a goddess of childbirth would drive her to have children of her own. It was a frightening thought for her, and all the more frightening because she had never thought of having children before. That frightening thought and the insecurities it brought with it summoned other insecurities that Artemis hadn't realized she carried. After gathering her thoughts, Artemis turned to look at Naruto, who was cheerfully feeding the ducks bits of a ration bar. Naruto, Artemis paused for a second and waited until she had his attention. I want to know something. Would you still go through with our engagement if my hunter's safety was not dependent on our marriage? Naruto bit his lip to keep himself from blurting something out as he thought about how to respond to Artemis's question. Finally, Naruto figured out how he wanted to say everything and spoke. I would continue our engagement if the hunter's safety was not a factor. If you wish to continue it, Artemis. Not that I think something like that would happen, since I know you prefer to be single. Any man that could freely have your hand in marriage would be very lucky, since you're a strong, determined, independent, confident, and compassionate woman. While the nobles of the daimyo's court back in the land of fire may prize beauty and meekness, shinobi like me prefer ladies who have your traits. Artemis's blush increased in intensity as she listened to Naruto talk about her traits that she liked. Almost all mortals, most gods, and many goddesses tended to be irritated by her tomboy ways. Ironically, the goddess of maidens was the most unladylike goddess one could find. The fact many people, especially males, did not like her tomboy nature contributed to her desire to stay single and alone with her hunters. The fact that more men were accepting of tomboys and strong women in general was one of better aspects of the modern world in Artemis's opinion. However, she hadn't expected to meet someone who came from a culture where those traits were desired, and it piqued her curiosity. So why do the shinobi of Konoha prefer strong, independent women, Naruto? I've noticed that feudal structured societies tend to prefer meek women who stay in the kitchen unless they're called to get their husbands a sandwich. Naruto simply replied, why wouldn't a shinobi want a strong, independent woman as his wife? Women like that are better able to defend their homes, raise strong children, and push their husbands to become better people as well as being better warriors. A shinobi on a dangerous mission doesn't have to worry about his wife, children, and his home's safety because he knows his wife can handle anything that comes up. Because of that, he can focus on his mission and ensure that he stays alive to come back to them. Honesty, I can't understand why so many guys here in America want all of those stars in Hollywood. The main thing they have going for them is looks, and any academy graduate could create a clone transformed to look like eye candy. That answer reminded Artemis of Sparta and their ways. While she had detested the Spartan practice of bride kidnapping, she had respected the freedoms and respect they gave to Spartan women compared to the rest of Greece at the time. Artemis found that she liked much of what she heard from Naruto over the past several months about Konoha and the shinobi villages in general. The polygamy she could have happily done without, but she understood on an academic level why Konoha had such laws in play. The fact that such laws rarely came into play and only when the wife or wives of a shinobi allowed them go into effect lessened her annoyance. Naruto and she spent the next 20 minutes talking about Konoha and about the hunter's training regime before they headed back to camp. Later that night, Naruto was having a fitful night's sleep in his tent as a nightmare plagued him. In his dreams, Naruto was once again catapulted back to the long-forgotten era where the Titans and the first race of men fought a desperate battle of survival against enemies that could only be labeled as demonic abominations. This dream of Naruto's brought him to the sacking of a city by those demonic forces. Tears fell from his eyes as he was forced to watch the demons rip unborn children from their mothers' wombs and threw them into a fire. While in other areas of the city, captured children were pulled apart limb by limb in front of their parents, who were slowly dying from being impaled with spikes. Why was he watching this atrocity? Naruto furiously struggled to wake up from this nightmare, or at least avoid watching the ancient atrocity. There was no reason for the brutality he was forced to watch. This was savagery and cruelty for the sake of savagery and cruelty. In his nightmare, Naruto was forced to look at the demonic soldiers' faces and see the pleasure these wicked acts caused them. For the first time in his life, Naruto found someone that he truly hated. He had hated Pain destroying Konoha and hated Madara's plan to reform the Jubi and cast a genjutsu over the world. However, Naruto had never hated Pain or Madara personally. Those two, despite committing terrible acts, were simply trying to help others in their misguided way. Naruto had hated what they did, but he only felt pity for them as people. These monsters before his dream eyes caused suffering just for the joy it gave them to watch others suffer. Nothing could excuse such actions. Without warning, Naruto's dream self was propelled into the sky, allowing him to glimpse at the once magnificent city that was burning before him. He then noticed that the aura of suffering coming from the city started to form into streams of energy, and were being pulled to one spot in the city. Naruto's dream self was forced to follow the energy streams until he came at the city's palace, where he saw a demonic woman sitting on a blood-stained throne. This demonic woman had a row of horns on her head, her eyes were two orbs of hellfire resting in her eye sockets, and her skin looked like it was pieced together from dozens of various rotting corpses. She had a bow made of human bone, a sash made of hands, and severed human heads with their hair woven together to make her clothes. This almost bestial demoness was breathing in the refined suffering of the city as it were a drug to her. The demoness turned to one of her attendants and said, "Tell Tawaz Melek that the capital of the Nakal is ours." In response, the demon bowed and replied, "Your wish is my command, Anat." The attendant then disappeared in a blaze of hellfire. The sickening joy everyone in this room felt over what was happening to the city made Naruto wish again that he could fight them instead of simply watch them. It would be better to fight and die than to simply watch these abominable acts happen. A series of explosions suddenly rocked the palace as over a dozen sages appeared out of thin air and attacked the demons attending Anat. Anat didn't care at all as her attendants were cut down and looked at the sages like they were bugs to be squashed. She casually drew her bow and proceeded to shoot the sages so that they were out of the action and suffering horrendous pain while staying alive. All of the sages' attacks directed at the demoness were casually batted away with her hand. Once Anat was finished with the sages, she looked around and saw Rhea standing in the throne room with 4 more sages forming a barrier around Rhea to protect her. Anat chuckled and mockingly said, "And just what do you hope to accomplish here, little princess? Your father and brothers are currently locked in combat with my fellow Bile, Hadad and the armies that Tawuz-Melek has given him to command. My power is far superior to yours. Still, this feudal stand of yours amuses me. If you surrender now, I give my word as a Baal that your suffering will be limited just to being gang-raped by my soldiers daily. It's a better deal than those worthless mortals you have for subjects to receive. Rhea coldly replied, My father and his fellow kings were tasked by Attic Yaman to watch over and guide those under their rule when he created them and this planet. Neither they nor their fellow deities such as me will fail in that duty. You may be stronger than me, but it is not always the strongest that wins. Rhea then started to chant something that Naruto couldn't understand. Anat seemed amused at first, and then her face grew horrified as she realized whatever it was that his grandmother was preparing to do. The Demoness immediately started to attack the barrier with her arrows, and it inevitably fell. The sages used themselves as human shields to protect Rhea. An oppressively cold aura filled the palace as Rhea finished her chant. The aura reminded Naruto of what he had felt during Orochimaru's invasion of Konoha years ago. Rhea was suddenly covered in long white robes, and a dagger appeared in one hand and a set of black beads appeared in the other. She threw the beads at Anat, forming a chain between the two of them. Naruto watched in shock as the beads pierced Anat through where her heart would be if she was a human. The Demoness was paralyzed as Rhea tugged at the beads and started to pull an astral form of the Demoness out of said Demoness' body. Soon the astral form of the Demoness was almost completely free of her body except for a small blue thread that connected the two. Rhea pulled the astral form of Anat closer to her until it was within arm's reach. She then took the dagger in her hand and used it to sever Anat's astral connection to her body. The demon's regular body disintegrated like sand in the wind. Rhea then coldly said, Forbidden art, sealing of the demon to be consumed into death. Naruto watched as Rhea opened her mouth, and Anat's soul was pulled inside his grandmother. Once Anat's soul was consumed, Rhea fell to her knees as a seal flared into existence on her womb. Naruto was jolted awake at this point, covered in a cold sweat, and his whole body was shaking. He looked around himself completely shaken and almost frightful of what might happen. What had he truly seen in his nightmare, and just what did it mean? Naruto's eyes slowly narrowed as he realized that he just might know who could answer these questions for him. Without any hesitation or waiting to change his clothes, Naruto bolted from his tent in his pajamas and rushed over to where Bucephalus was resting. Naruto quickly got his steed up and prepped him for riding. Once in the saddle, Naruto ordered, Take me to SKL up at your fastest speed, Bucephalus. As Bucephalus shot out of the hunter's camp like a bullet, Naruto's face hardened with determination. The time of wait until you're older and you don't need to know about that just yet was over. He was going to get the answers he needed, and he was going to get them now. Chapter 23. In record time, Naruto and Bucephalus returned to Alaska and came to the Hayate household. Naruto quickly grabbed the hidden key and unlocked the back door. He marched into the house knowing that Rosweiss was out on a teacher conference, and SKLUP was there as an adult supervisor to Issei. Not that SKLUP was providing any real supervision, as both he and Issei were on the couch watching porn. Rosweiss had honestly given up the fight and accepted that her son had somehow become a major pervert. These days she mostly just focused on damage control and to get him to be a functional member of society with his perversity. Naruto marched over to the widescreen television and pressed the off button without SKLUP or Issei noticing his presence. Both perverts blinked their eyes in shock for a few seconds, trying to comprehend that the naughty nurse's breasts were no longer being displayed on the boob tube. As soon as they realized that the TV had been turned off, they both shouted out profanities. Naruto called out, That's enough, you two. Issei, you can wait for SKLUP to come back by reading those porn magazines of yours, or you can turn the TV back on when SKLUP and I are out of the room. I honestly don't care what you do. As for you, SKLUP, it's time you start talking about what happened during the Abyss War, because I have questions that need to be answered now. SKLUP shot Naruto an angry look. You don't just come into a house someone is staying at, turn off their porn, and expect them to tell you about things that you want to know, Naruto. Besides, it's too dangerous for you to know more about that terrifying time. Just the fact that you know about the Abyss War's existence is dangerous enough for one with ties to Olympus. There is no reason why I should talk to you more about this matter. Now why don't you go back to your girlfriend's bed and let us poor souls enjoy what comfort we can get from the female form? A twitch appeared on Naruto's face and he replied, For the last time, Artemis is not my girlfriend and I am definitely not sleeping in her bed. What kind of a man do you take me for? As for the Abyss War, I have a very good reason to know what happened during it. I just had a half-blood dream showing me the sack of the Nakal capital city by Anat and my grandmother using something called forbidden art, sealing of the demon to be consumed into death on said demonis. Now I need some answers and I need them now. Trust me when I say I can handle whatever information you're trying to hide, CSI Olympus. I can handle having my father seal a bijou in my gut, despised by most people in my village during my early childhood, getting transported to another world, finding out my mother is a goddess, and that I've got ties to 2 different pantheons. There's not much left that can hope to shock me at this point. The coyote spirit resigned himself to the fact that Naruto knew too much to be kept in the dark any longer. He got off of the couch and told Issei, I'm going to talk to Naruto about a few things. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't continue the naughty nurses marathon before I return. If you do, I'll replace all of your porn with yaoi midget porn. Are we clear on this point? Issei rapidly nodded his head while looking a little green at thought of CSI Olympus' punishment. CSI Olympus and Naruto walked into Roswei's office, which was on the other side of the house. The coyote spirit closed the door behind them and motioned for Naruto to sit down. Once both of them were seated, he said, All right, Naruto, I suppose it's time that you found out about why many things are as they are here in the West. Some of what I'm about to tell you has been hidden by the Olympians, and much more of it has been hidden from them by the regents. This is the kind of information that shatters one's perceptions of reality if one is not flexible enough to understand it. Don't talk about it to others unless you and others who are in the know agree that someone else can handle this knowledge and needs to know as well. Once Naruto nodded his head, CSI Olympus began his explanation. This universe is even vaster than what mortals currently speculate thanks to their science. It and all the worlds in it are the creation of one massively powerful entity that deserves the metaphysical title of God with a capital G. Among the Greeks, this entity was very dimly and distortedly remembered as chaos. Deities such as myself and the regents very rarely mention this entity, and only by a title which can still summon a portion of its power if several deities are present when it is spoken. That title is Attic Yaman. I cannot say much about Attic Yaman as I have never met it. Only the 4 kings were able to even stand in its presence when it created the earth and all of us, while all others had to stand in the king's shadows to avoid being blinded by Attic Yaman's glory. After our creation, Attic Yaman gave the 4 kings their domains and duties before moving on to give life to another world. For millennia after our creation, both the deities and humans living in the 4 kings' domains grew and multiplied. Life was good as we lived in a paradise, a true paradise, and not the distorted notions of paradise that people have in this age. That all ended when the one we call Tawuz Melek came to this world. From what we've learned, Tawuz Melek was once an attendant of Attic Yaman who grew prideful and desired Attic Yaman's power for itself. Naturally, he was defeated, but he and his followers retreated to Earth, which they intended to take over and use as a base to fight Attic Yaman again. Whether or not he had other forces on other worlds, no one can say. Helping to lead his army of lesser and greater demons were 6 generals which were known as Bals. Their names were Hadad, Moloch, Dagon, Ashera, Astarte, and Anat. While extremely powerful in their own right, the Bals did not match a tenth of Tawuz Melek's power even they combined their forces. For many centuries the 4 kings and their forces battled Tawuz Melek's forces in a war that almost destroyed all life on this world. Mortals have only a faint idea of the devastation during that war when they came up with the Toba catastrophe theory out of remnants of the Abyss War we were unable to clean up after all these thousands of years. They even had to call upon Attic Yaman and get reinforced by a host of its warriors in order to eventually defeat Tawuz Melek. Even with reinforcements, it took an additional century to finally Tawuz Melek and his Bals. Tawuz Melek was eventually stripped of most of his powers and sealed deep underground the wasteland now known as the Rub al-Khali, with the southern pantheon tasked with keeping watch over his prison. His stripped powers became the curses of pestilence, war, famine, and death. These curses were sealed into the 4 pantheons by lot so that the earth could become a living planet once again. When we were given our curse, the deities you know as the Titans were driven temporarily insane from the curse's effects, adding on to the post-traumatic stress they were dealing with, and attacked Lord Uranus. Naturally, our king soundly defeated his children and pulled as much of the corruption that was within them into himself as he could. He then devised a plan that is eventually supposed to end the corruption and started it by leaving us to go to the elemental countries. I don't know much about what the Great Spirit has been doing over there. All I know for sure is that Coke Cole stated that Lord Uranus turned his body into a massive tree. Escalip was not about to bring up the transition prophecies or the other prophecies Auranas left the regents with Naruto, as they would only confuse him. Hell, they confused the regents after millennia of thinking about them. Naruto cut in and asked, "What about Aphrodite? How did she come about if the story of Auranas being cut up by my grandfather is not true?" Naruto had been doing some research Aphrodite, trying to find something he could use to get the goddess to agree to free Artemis from her oath. His great-aunt Freya was a great source of information that was more than willing to share any information to take Aphrodite down a peg. Apparently, the North's goddess of love viewed her Western counterpart as an airhead skank that was dragging the reputation of love goddesses everyone into the mud. While Freya did have a lot of lovers as a goddess of love, she stayed faithful to those lovers for the months or years that they were together, and she did not encourage oath-breaking like Aphrodite did all the time for a good forbidden romance story. It was a good thing that Aphrodite stayed solidly within the West, because Naruto was sure his mother would have to start screening applicants for a new goddess of love if Freya ever got the opportunity to get her hands on Aphrodite. Escalip chuckled for a second and then replied, "Aphrodite is the daughter of two deities like me who sadly died from wounds they got in the war. Her mother was the water spirit Leviathan, and her father was an air spirit named Ziz. Her mother died at birth while her father died a few months before she was born. The story of her birth in Greek mythology is a mangled retelling of Ziz's death. He died during the final battle against Melek by falling into the ocean and fading because of his wounds. The whole cut balls thing probably came about because everyone was always saying that Ziz must have had truly massive balls to pull off all of the insane stunts he did during the war to save people." The lecture quickly returned to its serious tone. Eventually, the Titans woke up from their comas and their minds were completely scrambled with massive holes in their memories. They had almost completely forgotten about the war and all of the other deities that eventually became the regents. They got this strange notion in their heads that their father was this evil tyrant that they had overthrown. Kronos soon managed to take charge of his brothers and sisters, proclaiming himself king of a subsection of the West. The regents eventually found out what the Titans were doing and decided that it would be more trouble than it was worth to get the Titans to realize what had truly happened. Maybe not the best decision the council ever made. In the regents' defense, everyone was still in shock over the Abyss War and its aftereffects, along with the fact that we were all up to our eyeballs trying to get the West back together again. The Titans were hard workers, bringing the section of the West they claimed as theirs back into order, and were good rulers at that time. The thought of the council at the time was why ruin that in order to force them to remember hellish centuries of war. Now, in order for you to understand everything else that I'm going to talk to you about, we need to back up a bit and talk about the Bals. They were handled in a different manner and were defeated before Melek. Rhea developed the called forbidden art, sealing of the demon to be consumed into death technique after centuries of studying various runes. From what I understand, her notes for this technique traveled with the last of first race of man when we sent them to the elemental countries during the closing decades of the Abyss War to survive because the earth had become inhospitable to humans. Those notes eventually ended up with the Uzumaki clan, who used them to create the Shiki Fujin. With this technique, Rhea was able to seal the Bals one by one within her and turn their deplorable deeds against them to slowly cleanse their souls. She tried to use it against Melek, but he was simply too powerful for her technique to work. Millennia later, the Bals were reborn as the Elder Olympians. Escalip stopped his lecture for a moment so that Naruto could process what he had just told him. It was a good thing that Escalip had told Naruto to sit down before he began, because the young shinobi would have fallen to the ground with how shocked he was. Not that the coyote spirit could blame him. No matter how tough you are or how prepared you are, you will be shocked by certain revelations. Finding out that your mother's past life was as a demon that made a gestalt of every mass murder and depraved psychopath in human history look an innocent 2-year-old girl having a tea party in comparison with such a revelation. Escalip waited a few minutes and then smacked Naruto upside the head. Ouch! Naruto yelled as he started to rub the side of his head that Escalip had hit him. What the Tartarus was that for? With snort, Escalip shot back, that was to reset your brain, fool. So your mother a depraved mass-murdering psycho demon in her past life, get over it. That was tens of thousands of years ago and another lifetime. By the time she and her siblings were ready to be reborn, they weren't any worse than their cousins in terms of corruption or an inclination to evil. Unfortunately for them, Kronos dimly realized who their past lives were, and his own corruption distorted the threat of the Bals against Earth from his suppressed memories into a personal threat against his power. That's why your mother and her siblings were swallowed at birth by their father. When we found out about what your grandfather was doing, we were preparing to rescue them. Unfortunately, Rhea deep-sixed our plan when she decided to save Zeus in order to have one over her sisters. Iktomi was not happy having to be undercover as Kronos' personal chief for the next 2 decades so that he could slip corruption-resistance drugs into Kronos' food in order to protect the elder Olympians while we looked for the corruption pit Zeus was hidden in. Thankfully, Zeus was found before we exhausted our resources making those drugs, as they are not cost-effective at all. During the war between the Titans and the Olympians, the Regency Council supported the Olympians as they were the better of the two factors for mortals. Our support was covert because we had to focus on protecting mortals in this world from the worst effects of the war. After the war, things were slightly better in the areas now under Olympian management, so the Council decided to let things be instead of taking direct control. Unfortunately for us, there was one little fact about the corruption and the Olympians' previous incarnations that none of the regents knew for centuries, while Tawuz Melek did know. The corruption within the Olympians preserved an imprint of their past lives and created a similar imprint in all of their offspring. These imprints grow stronger with more corruption and invocation of these demonic memories. Tawuz Melek used this knowledge and the smidgen of his power that we couldn't seal away to convince some people on the border regions of the west and south that those demons were gods. He gave those mortals knowledge of despicable rites that would strengthen the demon echoes in the Olympians, granting them more power and the ability to faintly interact with the world for short time. This created a sustaining cycle that, if left unchecked, would have caused the Bals to overpower their current lives and take permanent control. We discovered this fact when all of the Olympians' deity children that were being born during a period of time were tainted by Tawuz Melek's plan and quickly became demons with deity bodies. Athena was only one born during this period that we were able to luckily save from having to be expunged from existence. Several methods were employed at the same time to combat this plan of Tawuz Melek. Outside of the West control, Adik Yaman claimed a small band of clans as its own. It used those clans to wipe out many of the demon worshippers and gave the lands of the demon worshippers to those clans, along with becoming their personal deities so long as they were completely faithful to it. While I haven't really followed things outside of the West, I have heard that the descendants of those clans had a very hard time living up to their end of the deal. In the West, everyone in the Council of Regents pooled their abilities together and created the Latin protocols. These protocols were based on our earlier work to keep Athena from succumbing to her demonic taint. The Latin protocols suppressed the demonic taint festering in the Olympians and mind-wiped those echoes of the elder Olympians and the tainted alter egos in the young Olympians of their demonic state. They then create a new personality on top of the demonic one based off of a god or goddess's true self. These personalities are harsher and perhaps a touch crueler than then Olympians. However, they allowed the demon sides to emerge in a controlled state from time to time, which can later be suppressed by the Olympians' true selves subconsciously after the Olympians have had a chance to rest. These deified demons, if you will, are known to mortals as the Roman gods. Creating what's known as the Roman gods was best solution we could find to handle this problem without having to wipe out the Olympians. For the most part it works, even if there are a few downsides to the situation. We've had to work to ensure that the Romans' gods stay away from their offspring, as they are much more susceptible to corruption because of their demonic aspect. Additionally, we've had to direct their more aggressive natures in somewhat useful directions. For instance, we directed Cato the Elder to have the Romans completely destroy Carthage so that the last holdout of the Baal worshippers was wiped out. Now mortals only think that the atrocities committed by the Carthaginians for their gods was propaganda. We've only had trouble with the Latin protocols once. That problem was handled thanks to Alaric the Goth, a son of Freya and the reincarnation of Hector of Troy, who introduced an update to the protocols during his sack of Rome. Escala paused for a second and sighed as he moved on to the last part of his lecture. This was a lot of information to dump on Naruto all at once. However, Escala felt that it would be better if he knew the whole situation now instead of finding out in bits and pieces. Roman half-bloods, being biologically half-human and half-deity while spiritually half-human and half-demon, are a contentious issue among the regents. Unlike Greek or true half-bloods, in Roman half-bloods there is a slim possibility that their darker sides or taint can overpower their human half and corrupt their divine aspects. When that happens, they at best become a depraved serial killer, and at worst physically transform them into a minor demon. The odds of the second possibility happening when the taint consumes them are directly proportional to the half-blood's power. There is a small minority among the regents that feels Roman half-bloods represent too much of a risk to everyone in the West, and that they should all be killed at birth. Thankfully, the rest of the regents have soundly defeated proposals to that effect when those jerks gather the courage to present them again. Lupa, who first came up with the Latin protocols I should mention, has argued and proven that Romans can be taught to avoid letting the taint consume them through harsh military discipline. Over the past 3 centuries she's been able to maintain a 97% success rating. The 3% who sadly have too much corruption within themselves for the training to prevent the taint from taking control of them are put down by Lupa. She uses the cover story that they are too weak for Rome to explain these actions to the Romans when they found out about her killing young half-bloods centuries again. Escala paused to walk over to Naruto and wrap his arm around the young teenager's shoulder. He pulled Naruto into a hug like an uncle and said, "That was a lot of stuff for you to find out about tonight, Naruto. Personally, I'd recommend getting a barrel of quality booze and a couple of hookers to spend the rest of the night with in order to deal with all of that information." Naruto shot Escalip an angry look that caused the mischievous deity spirit to chuckle. "I know, Naruto, you'd rather do things your own way on these matters. Still, I recommend that you crash here for tonight as you're tired and you've just been told a lot of information." Naruto frowned and said, "I have to be getting back to Artemis now, Escalip. Thanks for answering my questions. I wish I had remembered to use the Horatian to get here, but Bucephalus can get me back to the camp soon enough." Escalip nodded his head and said, "Goodbye, Naruto, and have a safe trip back to your girlfriend. If it will set your mind at ease and help you sleep, then know this little fact. Somehow, your mother was able to eradicate the corruption and taint that was within her when part of her became Kushina. Her demonic echo is completely destroyed and there is no way for it to ever come back. Lord Auranas is obviously working whatever it is, and there are signs that it will be completed relatively soon." A small smile appeared on Naruto's lips. "Thanks, Escalip, that actually does make it easier to deal with everything that you have told me tonight." Artemis was driving the moon in the sky, deeply thinking about what she should do about tomorrow. Her first instinct was to go hunting with the hunters since she didn't sense any pressing need to deal with her other divine duties. The only problem with that idea was the fact that Naruto was currently staying with her and the hunters. She viewed him as a good friend and eventually had to marry him, but she was not about to take him hunting with her and her hunters. Hunting with the hunters was something special to Artemis, and she was not about to have anyone or anything change that. Perhaps one day after Naruto had proven his tracking skills to her, and they were married, she would be willing to go on a private hunt with just the two of them. However, her group hunt with the hunters was going to remain a strictly girls-only activity, and that was non-negotiable. Of course, Artemis was still stuck with the conundrum of how to exclude Naruto from the hunting party without being a terrible host or hurting her feelings. Artemis knew that there had to be a solution besides not hunting for the next 5 days, but she was having trouble seeing it. Why had she invited and insisted that Naruto stay with her and the hunt over his spring break again? Oh yes, she wanted to keep him away from that goddess Sunna and see how things might work once the wedding occurred. While Artemis was sure that Sunna was probably a decent goddess, she sensed that the northern goddess would be trouble for Naruto in the future. Probably because she was a solar goddess. Artemis knew that solar deities tended to be almost more trouble than they were worth, as idiotic twin routinely proved. Perhaps she could ask Naruto to look after Caroline while she and the others were out hunting? Normally she'd have to pick one of the girls to stay and take care of an injured huntress. None of the hunters liked it when they were picked for nurse duty. They'd do it because they wanted to help their sister, but all of them would rather be out hunting with her. The more Artemis thought about the idea, the better it seemed. Asking Naruto to look after Caroline would allow her to hunt with her hunters without slighting Naruto. It would also help her hunters accept his presence among them in their camp. They were fine with Naruto as a friend when he was at Camp Half-Blood or somewhere else. But Artemis could see that they were a bit skittish with him spending long amounts of time in their camp, which she and the hunters were used to thinking of as a private refuge. Artemis wasn't bothered by Naruto's presence in her camp because she knew that he wouldn't do something to intentionally hurt her hunters and he was trustworthy. The fact that Hera had to get permission from Naruto's human superior in Konoha so he would teach the half-bloods about chakra was proof enough of that. Artemis was pulled out of her thoughts when she noticed an 8-legged horse running on the ground at supersonic speeds with a rider. She then saw that Naruto was riding on Bucephalus asleep in his pajamas. Before Artemis could wonder what in Tartarus Naruto was doing sleep riding his horse at 2 a.m., she saw him starting to fall out of his saddle. Artemis teleported out of her chariot and caught Naruto before he could fall onto the ground without thinking about it. She teleported with him back to her chariot and gently set him down on the floor of the chariot. Surprisingly, Naruto had a peaceful look on his sleeping face, completely unaware of his near-death experience. Normally, when a god or goddess decided to save a half-blood from certain death, they would read the half-blood's mind to find out how the half-blood got into almost certain death situation. Since Artemis couldn't read Naruto's mind, she had to call in someone who could. As Bucephalus was flying up to the lunar chariot to follow his master, Artemis called out, "I, Lady Artemis, beseech Lady Hera, Queen of the Heavens and the gods of Olympus, to hear my call and respond. Naruto has gotten into a very bizarre and dangerous situation." There was a flash of light by the side of the chariot as Hera appeared inside wearing a bathrobe over her nightgown. Hera instantly spotted her son sleeping by Artemis' feet and gave the goddess a hard look. "What is going on here, Artemis?" "I don't know, Hera," Artemis quickly shot back. "I was just doing my usual round when I spotted Naruto asleep in the saddle of his horse. I saved him when he was about to fall out of the saddle, but I have no idea why he was in that situation in the first place." Without needing to be asked, Hera immediately reached over and placed her hand on Naruto's forehead while she started to read his mind. All of the icter drained from her face as she saw Naruto's dream and the lecture Sklp had given him. Artemis watched with growing trepidation as Hera's face grew paler, and a shocked look which she had never recalled seeing on the queen's face appeared. It took Hera a few minutes to regain her composure, and afterwards she slowly stood up. Slowly Hera turned to look at Artemis and said, "Naruto had a particularly troubling dream tonight, and immediately investigated it. He found out a lot of troubling information, but he's alright and the situation is under control." Hera's face hardened as she continued, "As Queen of Olympus, I'm putting everything Naruto saw in his demigod dream and what he learned between the time he left your camp and you found him again under level Omega secrecy. When Naruto wakes up, I expect you to inform him that what he found out is under a strict need-to-know basis with only him and me needing to know at this time. There will be no further mention of this situation to anyone until I say so." Artemis nodded her head, understanding her orders. She might be curious about what Naruto had found out, but she was not about to mess around with Omega secrecy. Not even her idiotic siblings at their worst messed around with that rarely invoked level of secrecy. After Hera left, Artemis looked down at her fiancé and sighed. Why was Naruto always getting into troublesome situations? Chapter 24. Chiron was sitting in his Professor X wheelchair, so named by Nathaniel Lloyd, who created it during his second summer at camp, at Yancy Academy, wondering how Grover did it. There was a generally understood and unspoken rule among keepers that Grover was violating, again. Keepers do not typically find half-bloods that are powerful enough to attract more problems than the keeper can ward off. Such things rarely happened, as in maybe once or twice a century. Sadly, when these incidents occurred, there was a high chance of the half-blood, the satyr, or even both individuals ending up dead. Talia's tree was the biggest reminder of such an incident that had stuck with the camp in its past 3 iterations. Percy Jackson's discovery by Grover was giving Chiron a massive headache. How was it that one of the kindest, but definitely most ill-equipped satyrs had managed to find 2 extremely powerful half-bloods within a decade of each other? If Chiron didn't know better, he'd almost bet that Taichi was carrying out a vendetta with the poor satyr over the fact that Grover's father and uncle stole her daughter's underwear during a panty raid as teenagers. At least Grover was able to call in backup, and there weren't any other half-bloods involved this time. That was something to be grateful about in his book. While Chiron was happy there was only one half-blood at Yancy, he was not happy about the confusion Percy was unintendedly putting him through with his bizarre scent. The reek of the extremely obnoxious mortal that surrounded Percy wasn't confusing at all for the old trainer. He hadn't seen that trick used in centuries by a mortal parent, but Chiron knew that Percy's mother was using another mortal to mask his half-blood scent from monsters. The centaur's sympathy did go out to Percy's mother, because whoever his mother was using to mask the boy's scent had to be an extremely nasty piece of work to get a reek that strong. The fact that such a strong smell was needed to mask Percy's extremely strong scent raised a mental alarm in Chiron's mind. It likely meant that one of his younger brothers had lost their self-control and given him a nephew to look after. Percy being a mixed-blood half-blood was a distant, although very much hoped for by Chiron, second possibility. Mixed-blood half-bloods were typically stronger than regular half-bloods due to being more god than mortal. Valerie Frizzle, the last such half-blood Chiron had trained, had the strength to rival a child of the Big Three. The only problem with that idea was that a half-blood or a legacy would not need to use a masking mortal odor to protect Percy. As troublesome as the strength of Percy's scent was, It was what was underneath the mortal reek hiding Percy's scent that really concerned Chiron. There was something off about Percy's scent in addition to his uncomfortably immense slumbering power. It wasn't the scent of a mixed-blood half-blood or the scent of monster ancestry. While rare, monsters did occasionally sire offspring with mortals. Foreign was probably the best word to describe what Chiron's experienced nose was sensing. Naruto had a faint hint of this scent, but that was to be expected living all those months a year on the edge of Olympus's control. Percy's foreign scent was much stronger and unexplainable, as the boy had apparently never left New York. The foreign scent reminded Chiron of the strange scent he had occasionally encountered during the closing decades of Camp Half-Blood 5 when he had to go to see some of his former students at the Imperial Palace of Constantinople. That scent had come from the strongest members of the Varangian Guard. How did Percy gain this addition to his scent? The current tension between Olympus and Atlantis only increased Chiron's concern over Percy. Grover hadn't noticed the signs because of his youth, but Chiron did see all of the signs. Percy was almost certainly related to an aquatic deity, and a powerful half-blood of that extraction would make things a lot more dangerous in an already tense situation. Thankfully, Hera wouldn't immediately assume that Percy was the thief like Zeus would if something of his was stolen. Judging from Percy's ignorance and personality, Chiron didn't think that Percy was connected to the theft at all. Hera would probably just insist that Percy swear a binding oath that he had nothing to do with the theft. That would probably be a spark that could ignite tension between Olympus and Atlantis. Even if the fates were smiling and Percy was not the son of Poseidon as Chiron secretly feared, Poseidon would move to put the boy under his protection and insist that no oath was necessary. Poseidon had been pissed at Hera ever since she started to insist that Amphitrite swear her innocence to having any part of the theft on the river Styx. Anything that caused Hera headaches was far game in Poseidon's book until Hera stopped, insisted on the oath, and apologized for doubting Amphitrite's word. The foreign aspect of Percy's scent might hold the only hope of keeping this standoff from turning into an all-out war. It was an extreme long shot, but there was a very faint possibility that whatever was giving Percy's scent that foreign undertone was masking his true demigod heritage and making it seem like the boy had an aquatic divine heritage. While such a possibility was almost impossible, the old trainer could still hold out hope until faced with irrefutable evidence. In any case, he still had a duty to protect Percy and see him safely to Camp Half-Blood. Naruto returned back to Alaska on the last day of his spring break. Artemis accompanied him on his trip from the hunter's camp riding the Saronian hind. They had spent most of the trip talking about their respective plans until summer. Naruto would be training himself and others while finishing off the school year. Artemis would be spending most of the time hunting predators that were encroaching on new ecosystems. When she got the opportunity, she'd also be putting down some members of the sex slave trade. Artemis wished that she could just wipe out every member of the trade, but that would be excessive intervention in mortal affairs. At least Hera had tripled Artemis's yearly limit of mortal filth to put down. When the duo reached the edge of the town, Artemis stopped, and Naruto quickly stopped as well. The goddess smiled at Naruto and said, "Thank you for spending time with me and my hunters this past week, Naruto. It was different, but very enjoyable." Naruto smiled in response and said, "It was great for me as well, Artemis. I'm really looking forward to trying out those 40k sets we got for our weekly game next time. Spending time with you and the hunters with my Kage Bunshins is alright, but I do prefer to spend time with my friends in person. Besides, I also like to see the progress the hunters have made. All that extra practice the hunters do during your hunting trips has left them at the top of the Nishu lessons. Until next time, Artemis." Artemis watched as Naruto rode into town and then frowned when she saw Sunna approaching on her motorcycle from the sky. The Greek goddess clenched her teeth together as she felt a burst of anger at Sunna's approach. She hadn't even left the vicinity of the town, and that goddess was moving in to have her way with Naruto. The urge to go into town and punch the Norse goddess welled up inside of Artemis, and she was barely able to control it. If Artemis had experience with these emotions, she would have realized that she was feeling jealous of Sunna. Just as Artemis was about to dismiss the Saronian hind so that she could teleport away, she felt a surge of divine power a few feet away from her. Artemis whirled around and saw a goddess appear covered in a cloak of falcon feathers with a massive boar the size of a Clydesdale standing by her side. Artemis shifted towards a defensive stance when she realized that this unknown goddess was another northern goddess. The goddess lowered the hood of her cloak to reveal long raven locks that were tied up so they were out of the way, but also easy to let them fall loose. She then held up her hands to show that she wasn't armed and then spoke, Be at peace, Artemis, daughter of Leto. I mean you no harm. In fact, I came to you today as a possible aid in your quest for my grandnephew's hand. I am Freya, the Norse goddess of love, sexuality, beauty, and fertility. I also have some minor aspects involving gold, magic, war, and death. Artemis frowned and said, What does Aphrodite's counterpart? Freya immediately cut Artemis off with a hiss. She then spoke in a hostile and dangerous tone. Don't you ever compare me to that whore you call a love goddess. That filthy skank should be flayed and thrown into Nastrand with the rest of the accursed oath breakers. She wouldn't know true love or beauty if it hacked her with an axe. Freya's black eyes burned like lighted coals. Unconsciously, Artemis made her ride take a step back as she wearily looked at the enraged goddess. Freya was still hiding most of her power, but Artemis could sense that the Norse goddess at least rivaled her or Athena in power. Since the two virgin sisters were the strongest deities on Olympus outside of Hera or the Big Three, that meant that Freya was not someone she'd want to mess with. There was only one smart move to make in this situation, so Artemis swallowed her pride and said, I'm sorry for offending you, Freya. That apology took almost all of the energy out of Freya's rage and allowed her to quickly calm down. Freya bowed her head with a touch of pink on her cheeks from embarrassment. I am sorry as well, Artemis, for forgetting that you do not know much about the North. My hostility towards that bitch Aphrodite is well known among those I interact with. My hostility towards your question was uncalled for given your circumstances. Freya sighed and said, I suppose I should explain that outburst. I, like the rest of the Aesir, hold oaths and honor very highly. Aphrodite, with her outrageous number of affairs both with deities and with mortals, makes a mockery of her marriage oath, which is one of the most solemn oaths a person can give to another. She flitters here and there with her one-night stands and encourages people to focus on lust and sexuality instead, focusing on love and beauty. To add insult to injury, she encourages people to focus on surface feelings instead of true feelings and encourages affairs by saying that people should follow their hearts. The overt sexuality in current Western culture and the constant divorces that are plaguing the West at this time are the fault of her influence. A pained look appeared on Freya's face as she continued to speak. Do you know how painful it is to have a harlot making a mockery of your position? To love is to give rather than to receive, to give in deeds and not in words, and to give of yourself and not in things. It also means to place someone else's happiness above your own to the point that you're willing to give up your own happiness so that they can be happy. Personally, I wish, Artemis, that you were the goddess of love for the West. While you are extremely ignorant about the romantic aspects of love, you have a great understanding of true love. The fact that you are willing and committed to sacrificing your most treasured possessions in order to protect those you love proves your understanding of true love. In all honesty, Artemis didn't know how she should take everything Freya had told her. On the one hand, she was happy that a powerful goddess she had just met was complimenting her. On the other hand, the idea of her being in charge of love felt like a slap in the face. Very quickly she decided that it was best to just accept the compliment, and figure that Aphrodite was so horrible at her job in Freya's eyes that anyone would be a better replacement. To put the whole thing behind her, the Western goddess inquired, Before we got off topic, you mentioned that you wanted to help me with your grandnephew. The Norse goddess of love nodded her head and answered Artemis. I am speaking, of course, about Naruto Uzumaki, who is, as you should know, is the grandson of my brother Freya. You have done an admirable job with starting to gain his affections and possibly his love. However, you have not secured his love or his hand. There is still space for Aphrodite to arrange for someone else to become Naruto's wife, or possibly his first wife. Before you can say anything, even oaths like the one Naruto gave you can be broken or negated. Artemis wasn't sure what frightened her more, the idea of Naruto having multiple wives or the idea of Naruto not marrying her. Although, she did know that the source of her fear over Naruto not marrying her was not as clear-cut as it used to be. In a low voice she asked, How can that happen? Freya gave Artemis a hard look and said, Love is an extremely complex emotion. It can withstand the hardest trials without a scratch, and it can also shatter in an instant into rage. The factor that determines which way love goes is honesty. One must be honest with themselves and with their partner, or a couple's love will not last no matter how much effort they put into it. Artemis blurted out, I tell the truth. That outburst caused Freya to snort in derision. Not all the time, and especially not where Naruto is concerned. I can see your attraction to Naruto plain as day, but you won't admit it out of your silly pride in the idea of staying unchanged. Newsflash, girl, people are changed by their relationships and especially by romantic relationships. Their core selves and most of their habits remain unchanged unless a person truly wishes to change that, despite what some foolish people think. Nonetheless, a person's priorities and some of their habits will change when they are in a relationship. If you want to have a happy relationship with Naruto, you must first be honest with yourself. You must acknowledge your own feelings towards Naruto and accept them as part of yourself. This means accepting that things will be different for you than they were when you were single. Once you are honest and at peace with yourself, you can move on to being honest with Naruto. Being honest with yourself is pointless in sustaining a relationship if you are not honest with your partner. Now, I'm not saying be blunt about everything, but you shouldn't lie or hide the truth. The most prominent example of you failing to do this at the moment is not admitting to Naruto that you are not interested in getting out of your engagement. If you do not tell Naruto, I can promise you that Aphrodite will find out and use it to turn him against you. Freya then got on her boar and gave one final warning. Heed my advice or not at your own peril, Artemis. It is your life and the consequences of your decisions are yours to deal with. If you listen to my advice, I will be willing to help you further in the future. If you do not, I will not help you and let you deal with Aphrodite's machinations against you and Naruto by yourself. As much as I don't want Aphrodite to win her bet with you, I will not help someone who will not help themselves. Freya then vanished in a flash of light, leaving a very confused and frightened Artemis behind. Life continued on as it always did for Naruto after his spring break with Artemis and the hunt. Every day after school, Naruto either having extra classes with Sunna, studying under CSI Olympus, or spending time with Artemis. Saturday was Naruto's effective day of rest, spending most of the day after a quick workout with Arnold, Issei, and especially his mother. On Sunday, Naruto did independent training and prepared scrolls full of Kage bunshins for other half-bloods. The number of scrolls had increased since Naruto first started making them, as Camp Half-Blood alumni started putting in orders for personal chakra training. Thanks to the alumni actually buying Naruto's scrolls, even though he would have offered them for free, he was making almost 100 drachma a month. Naruto was currently in Rosweiss' class, half-heartedly listening to her lecture. He was honestly trying to pay attention to the lecture, and Rosweiss was doing her best to make it interesting. However, it was just so boring to Naruto that he had to use most of his willpower to keep himself from zoning out like most of the class was doing. Then, just as Naruto was about to force himself again to focus on the lecture, he felt one of his Horatian kunai get used a vast distance away. Naruto every item with his Horatian seal formula sealed on his person at all times except for a few kunai that he had handed out for emergency purposes. Almost immediately, Naruto stood up while also manipulating the mist. He firmly looked Rosweiss in the eye and said, "I'm not feeling well at all, Mrs. Hayadu. I need to go see the nurse to make sure it's not something contagious." Rosweiss nodded her head and let Naruto leave the classroom, adding her power over the weave to his. Naruto hurried over to the classroom door and activated the Horatian Jutsu as he touched the doorknob. The instant Naruto finished teleporting, he took a defensive posture and tried to take stock of his surroundings. He was outside of a half-destroyed fancy school building with hundreds of teens running around screaming their heads off. Naruto picked up his Horatian kunai and then locked his eyes on the massive three-headed dragon that was tearing up the school building. Very quickly Sunna's lessons came rushing back to Naruto, and then he muttered, "What the Tartarus is May Goranik doing this deep in the west?" Monsters typically stayed in the areas under the control of the pantheon they traditionally opposed. Naruto wasn't sure why that was the case, and none of his teachers knew either. Interdomain monster migration patterns was not a priority issue for anyone who knew about the different domains to really research. The Zmays, and especially the Zmay-Goroniks, were an exception to the general rule of thumb regarding monster habitats. Many Zmays had followed, or perhaps chased, the South Slavic tribes out of the north and into the west. A few Zemis had continued their hunt and settled in the west, typically in isolated areas far from Olympus or the regent's interests. What could have caused this dragon to suddenly attack in an area deep in the west? Naruto knew that he had to be deep in the west, as none of the people he gave a Horatian kunai to would venture near the edges of Olympus's control. Chiron suddenly crashed out of second-story window and unleashing a barrage of arrows at the Zmei while he soared through the air. The centaur landed next to Naruto and said, "Thank Olympus you came, Naruto. I've got a powerful half-blood of unknown lineage mixed up somewhere in all of these panicking mortals, and a massive dragon-like monster that I've never seen before that suddenly shown up on a rampage." Naruto cut Chiron off and said, "That's Zmei Goranik, Chiron. Its scales are tougher than celestial bronze, and it is physically at least as strong as it looks. Cutting off one of its heads won't cause it to grow multiple new ones, but it can regenerate a head after a few hours. Besides their teeth, claws, and tails, Zmei-Goronyx naturally breathe fire. Judging by the slate-gray color of its scales, this Zmei is over a century old, which means it will have sentience along with access to storm-related magic. Seconds after Naruto said this, the center head of the Zmei roared into the sky, summoning lightning bolts. While pulling out an emergency bottle of Hydra blood, Chiron nodded his head, carefully listening to Naruto's explanation. Chiron was curious as to how Naruto knew all of this, but that could wait until another time. Chiron then called out, "Form several clones, Naruto, and have them create a barrier to protect the mortals. Grover will get the half-blood out of the school. You and I will focus on defeating this Zmei-Goronyx." The old centaur finished his orders by letting 3 arrows fly at once towards the Zmei's head. Unfortunately for Chiron, the 3 heads moved so that the deadly arrows harmlessly bounced the cold iron-hard scales. A dozen clones instantly appeared behind Naruto, half scattered to form a barrier around the terrified mortals. The other clones joined Naruto in creating wind-style Rasengan cannons. They then quickly fired the Rasengans at the Zmei. The Zmei whipped its tail out and used it to shield itself from Naruto's attacks. Large clouds of smoke appeared where the 7 Rasengans hit the Zmei's tail. Naruto and Chiron quickly had dodged the Zmei's fiery counterattack as 2 of its mouths let out jets of fire through the smoke. 2 of Naruto's clones were caught in the attack, but the other 4 were able to escape. 1 clone moved near Chiron while the rest quickly moved to provide cover for the clones on barrier duty. Naruto threw a knife with his Horatian formula at the Yancy school building and teleported to the half-collapsed roof. Immediately afterwards, Naruto unsealed his kanabo with one hand and picked up his throwing knife with the other. He then blasted the Zmei with enough killing intent to get the attention of all 3 of the powerful creature's heads. As the Zmei whirled around, its razor-sharp claws effortlessly sliced through the concrete rubble in their way. The 3-headed dragon's tail cracked like a whip as it stared down at Naruto with contempt on its face. Seeing the hundreds of students cowering behind his clone's barriers made Naruto decided to take a gamble to try and end this fight without risking the mortals' lives. He bellowed out in Yar-Germanic, "Why are you attacking?" The Zmei froze in shock, hearing the tongue of the north. Naruto motioned to Chiron with one of his Kage Bunshins to hold his next volley as he continued to speak to the Zmei. "What reason could have caused you venture so far from your cave? If you tell me, I can perhaps solve it without more destruction. No mortals have died yet, so this situation can still end without bloodshed, but this is the last chance we have before going to that abyss." The Zmei's heads almost seemed to be puzzled as it listened to Naruto's words. For a second, Naruto thought that he might be able to convince the Zmei to leave. Older Zmei usually preferred to stay near their caves so that they can protect their horde. Even with that hope, Naruto carefully observed the Zmei and noted the scales damaged by his Rasengans in case negotiations went south. Because he was observing the Zmei, he could see that all 6 eyes briefly glowed before it let out a defiant roar. Naruto jumped back and avoided a blast of fire while a grim look appeared on his face. Something was obviously controlling this Zmei, and Naruto couldn't sense a genjutsu on the creature for him to dispel. In a low, almost mournful tone, Naruto whispered in Yar-Germanic, "I'm sorry for what I'll have to do to you in order to protect the mortals caught in this situation." Naruto then created a Kage Bunshin that dispelled almost immediately after he created it in order to update all the other clones. Hera's son landed on the roof and then jumped to another section of the roof. He then jumped onto the Zmei's tail and lifted his kanabo above his head while shifting the kanabo to his maximum weight. Once the kanabo weighed 600,000 tons, Naruto guided its fall onto the base of the Zmei's tail. Chiron watched in worry as Naruto caused Yancey's roof to collapse, pulling him and the Zmei into the basement. Yancey might have been solidly built, but Chiron didn't know of any mortal building made that could withstand the equivalent impact of 3 of the largest fully laden cargo ships suddenly hitting the roof. The magical storm around the academy suddenly increased in its fury, echoing the muffled scream of the dragon in the basement. Chiron saw the Naruto clone near him pull out a Horatian knife and threw it at the floor. Naruto appeared where the clone's knife landed, painting from the strain of holding his kanabo at its maximum weight. With luck, the pain from that attack will break the hold of whatever is forcing the Zmei to attack us. If not, we'll be lucky and it will quickly die from the trauma. It was a little surprising to Chiron that Naruto wanted to end the battle without killing the monster. He remembered what Naruto told the campers during the previous summer session about the importance of respecting life. However, Naruto's attitude was so different from the majority of heroes Chiron had trained that it still surprised him. Most half-bloods would want the glory of killing a dragon, with almost all the rest being concerned with surviving the monster attack. Taichi was apparently in a bitchy mood as the school rubble started to shake. Naruto looked at his clone and both of them nodded. Chiron, we'll get an opening in the Zenith's armor when it emerges. If you've got any more Hydra blood, I'd suggest you get it ready now. As Naruto was saying this, he and his clone each prepared a Rasengan. Chiron quickly pulled out his bottle of Hydra blood, had enough blood for one more arrow. The Narutos saw how empty the bottle was, decided to focus their attack on the Zenith's heart. All three of the Zenith's heads roared out in agonizing defiance as they burst through the school rubble. It was obvious to Naruto and Chiron that Naruto's attack and the resulting building collapse had done a number on the Zenith. The three-headed dragon's front paws were shaky as they emerged. One of its wings was folded in an unnatural angle, and both wings had gashes in the wing membranes. Apparently the Zenith's hind legs had taken out by the attack, as the dragon was only moving by pushing with its front legs. This was probably due to spinal damage caused by shockwaves from the attack. While physically crippled, the Zenith was not out of the fight yet, as it slowly tried to clear the rubble. The storm around the campus ramped up to hurricane levels, and the lightning strikes exponentially increased. Chiron and the Naruto clones were forced to constantly dodge the magically created lightning. The barriers around the mortals started to buckle from all of the lightning strikes, but they were thankfully able to hold. Naruto and his clones started to fire off wind-style Rasengan cannons, but the hurricane-like winds ruined the attack's accuracy. The only saving grace for Naruto was the fact that the Zenith was unable to move from the rubble thanks to its broken wing and paralyzed legs. When the first round of Rasengan cannons missed, Naruto and his clone prepared another round and fired them off. Chiron was thankful for having bratty younger siblings who threw around lighting whenever they threw a temper tantrum. Sure, the amount of lighting was more than Zeus usually used, but Chiron's age-old dodging skills could handle all of the lighting. As he dodged, the ageless centaur kept his eye on the Zenith, hoping to get a clear shot of an exposed section of the beast. Naruto and his clone kept on firing their attacks and breaking off small sections of the Zenith's armor. Finally, the moment Chiron had been waiting for arrived, and a clear shot appeared. He quickly took it, and his arrow flew true even in the winds. The arrow buried itself to the fletching in the Zenith. The storm quickly started to abate as the poison coursed through the Zenith. Then the storm suddenly disappeared and the Zenith laid down on the rubble, wheezing in pain. A deep and agonized voice came from the three heads, speaking in a language that Chiron couldn't understand. "Aunts, come and listen to me. The force that drove me to attack this building has left me with my imminent death." Naruto fearlessly walked over towards the Zenith's heads, causing Chiron to worry about his nephew. Naruto gave the Zenith a slight bow and said, "What do you wish to say to me?" With its center head, the Zenith coughed, and then said, "You tried in this without bloodshed, and you apologized to me when you realized what you had to do in order to protect yours from my attack when I was under another's control. That respect deserves to be rewarded. Since I cannot tell you who controlled me, as I do not know myself, I will leave you what I can. Here is how you can find my cave." Chapter 25. Naruto quickly committed the Zenith's directions to its lair to memory, as the great beast drew its last breath. The dragon's body remained behind, as northern monsters did not simply turn to dust when they died. In northern tradition, Naruto quickly sealed away the Zenith's body to be disposed of at the proper place and time. Usually the residents of Asgard and their relatives on Earth would get one of the city's taxidermists to turn the beast into an appropriate decoration, or sometimes they would simply have the hide treated. Naruto planned to burn the Zenith's body and then scatter its ashes near the dragon's cave. It had been forced to attack the school against its will, so the last thing Naruto wanted to do was put it on display like some mindless beast. Had the three-headed dragon attacked the school of its own free will, then Naruto wouldn't have minded making a memento to commemorate Chiron's and his deed. Once the Zenith was secured, Naruto proceeded to destroy all evidence in the rubble of the mystical nature of the battle. A fact that most half-bloods tended to forget about manipulating the mist is that the results were better when there was less hard evidence that the mist had to cover up. It also allowed you to shape what mortals saw in the mist more accurately. It didn't take Naruto too long to destroy the signs that the building was destroyed by a dragon. He then got out of the rubble and headed towards Chiron. Grover came out of his hiding spot dragging an unconscious Percy as Naruto reached Chiron. The satyr soon joined up with the other two and said, "Bah, is everything alright, Chiron? Naruto, you're here? I guess Chiron must have used the special knife you gave him." The nervously friendly look on Grover's face helped Chiron to calm his nerves slightly from the battle high. Chiron glanced at Naruto, and then looked at Percy. There was no doubt in his mind that the dragon, which was from a species he had never even heard of before, had been after Percy. Best case scenario was that he was simply powerful enough to attract the beast to him. Worst case scenario was that someone sent the beast after Percy to enrage Poseidon by making it look like Zeus got rid of the boy, possibly on Hera's orders. Chiron knew his nephew Ares acted as a troubleshooter for Aphrodite roughly several times a century to get out of the doghouse. Zeus was well known to currently be on thin ice with Hera even after she forced him to just be a storm god in all but name. It wouldn't be irrational for someone to think that Zeus was taking a tried and true play from his son's playbook to get back in Hera's good graces. Chiron quickly made up his mind and said, "Our first priority is returning to Camp Half-Blood with Percy safely. Grover, I want you to procure us a working car from the faculty parking lot with a preference for a van." The old centaur paused as he saw Grover's face shift more towards nervousness. "You do remember how to hotwire a car, don't you, Grover?" Grover's ears got a touch of pink to them as he looked to the ground. Only cars made before the mid-90s. Both Naruto and Chiron stared at Grover in disappointment and a little disbelief. The nervous adder let out a bleat and then got defensive. It's hard to remember the differences that car makers are putting into the ignition systems of the newer cars, and then there's the other anti-theft add-ons that have become standard in the past few years. Naruto shook his head and said, "I'll get us a car, Chiron." He then bounded off towards the faculty parking lot, wondering what the hell they were teaching seekers these days. Hotwiring a car was one of the first things Valerie Frizzle taught him how to do once he was big enough to reach all of the controls. Being able to steal and drive a car, even if one's driving was atrocious, was an imperative survival skill for a half-blood since it greatly increased one's mobility. Not that Naruto really needed to drive thanks to Bucephalus and his Horatian seals. It didn't take Naruto long to pick out a van that was in drivable condition and hotwire it. He then drove it over to the trio and said while in the driver's seat, "One ride to Camp Half-Blood at your service." Chiron nodded his head and said, "Thank you, Naruto. Now if you don't mind, I will take care of the driving." "That's good, I'm not a good driver at all. I call shotgun though, just let me get out, and you can have the driver's seat." Naruto stopped talking as soon as the words left his mouth. Both he and Chiron looked at the driver's seat and then at the horse half of the centaur's body. Naruto then looked at the space that the driver's seat occupied and said, "Just give me a moment, Chiron." The demigod shinobi unbuckled and hopped out of the van. As soon as Naruto was out, he grabbed the driver's chair and ripped it out of the van. Then he tossed the chair over into the school rubble. That should have the added bonus of reinforcing the illusion the mist was projecting that school was hit by a car bomb. "Well," Chiron said with a little amusement, "that solves that problem." He then got into the van, sitting his hind legs where the seat used to be, and put his front hooves on the pedals. Naruto jumped over the van, landed at the passenger side door, and quickly made good his claim to the shotgun seat. Grover had to drag Percy over to the van, put the unconscious boy in a seat, buckle his friend up, and then get into his own seat. As soon as everyone was buckled up, Chiron put the pedal to the metal and drove off towards Camp Half-Blood. Self-reflection was perhaps the hardest art that a deity could try to perform. The art was hard enough for mortals to perform on themselves, but even the most pig-headed mortal could examine themselves and their actions far better than any deity could. Mortals could look at the world and realize there were things outside of their control. That realization created a seed of humility which could allow them realize their faults and strive to correct them. Mortality itself also helped mortals realize their faults, as it drove many of them to think about what they did in life and how that life would be remembered. On the other hand, deities were generally prideful, shallow, and creatures of the moment. Almost every deity could dream of ascending in power over other deities. Immortality dulled life's lessons, as deities could outlive the consequences of their mistakes. Thanks to their curse of death at the end of every Ragnarok, the Aesir got to experience mortality, and all of the benefits it brought them. The lessons they learned in each lifetime tended to dull a bit over, but each cycle saw improvements in the Aesir's actions. It drove them to try and become the kind of gods mortals wanted to rule over them. Not that the Aesir or even the deities in general who remembered the Abyss War had been cruel or uncaring towards mortals. It's just that it was generally hard for them to feel much for the current race of man when comparing it to the first race. A deity's power also tended to make it hard for them to feel sympathy and compassion for others. Artemis did not know about these facts when she set out to think about Freya's conversation that the Norse goddess had had with her almost a month ago. However, she was quickly learning why the Eastern pantheon had labeled humanity as the best of existences on Earth. It had taken her this long just to be able to start really looking over her actions. The fact that Artemis was able to do so this fast was remarkable, and had only happened because of the hunters. Spending time with and being responsible for the hunters gave her practice in looking beyond her immediate wants and desires. Looking back on her actions, the goddess couldn't help being annoyed at her actions after she found out about Naruto's existence. She had the right to be upset over finding out that her multi-millennia-long lifestyle was about to end. It was understandable that she was worried over what being married might mean for her. Especially when one considered the fact that a few men she had previously let get close to her had tried to rape her. Thankfully, those men had been quite rare among the number of male acquaintances and friends she had over the ages, even if they tended to predominate the myths that mortals had passed on. Part of her was still annoyed that Homer ignored her friendship with Hector and his wife, even if it was done to keep mortals from thinking that Hector's deeds had been achieved through divine favor. However, her behavior in the weeks and months following her learning about Naruto was not acceptable, even if Artemis still didn't want to admit it out loud. She was barely able to break her pride enough to admit to herself that there was a problem with her actions back then. Inner turmoil or not, there was no excuse for being practically paralyzed for months because of her fear. As the leader of the hunt, it was her responsibility to look after all of her hunters, and she had effectively abandoned them during that period. Thankfully, Zoe had been able to pick up the slack like a good lieutenant. Most of the goddess's interactions with Naruto left her feeling uneasy, uncertain, anxious, often happy, and sometimes even elated when she reflected on them. The reason why Artemis had these feelings eluded her. She still had a long way to go before her meditation efforts could get past the stubbornness and pride she had inherited from her father. What Artemis did realize at the moment from her meditations is that she usually enjoyed Naruto's presence, and that she enjoyed it more than she usually enjoyed her occasional male acquaintances. The fact that she had found herself enjoying Naruto's company was an unexpected bonus from the fates in Artemis's mind. As Artemis continued her meditation, her thoughts drifted to the night when Naruto suddenly left her hunter's camp. She remembered every detail of that night, from the point she spotted Naruto until she got him back to her camp and placed in a bed that she summoned in her greeting chamber of her tent. The one thing among all the memories that was completely clear and apparent to Artemis. She had teleported on instinct to catch Naruto. Why had she caught him without even thinking about it? Not that Artemis wanted Naruto to die. In fact, the thought of him dying made her sick to her stomach. What was bugging Artemis was the fact that she simply reacted to save Naruto. Shouldn't she have at least thought about it for a split second before she saved him? After all, that was a golden opportunity for her to win her bet with Aphrodite, as she was only bound to marry Hera's first half-blood son. Under the terms of the oath, Artemis couldn't harm Naruto or arrange to put him into a deadly situation. At the same time, she didn't have to actively save Naruto if he ended up in a dangerous situation outside of her domain. Even if a dangerous event happened to Naruto while he was in her domain, she only had to give him the standard chance that any half-blood had to keep with her oath. If Naruto had fallen to his death, as he almost certainly would have, that night would have freed Artemis from the oath. Shouldn't she have at least stopped to think about that option? Part of Artemis wanted to dismiss these thoughts. Thanks to Hera, she knew that the fates had put her virginity on the auction block. Getting married was not on Artemis's list of 100,000 things she'd like to do, but losing her virginity to a husband was infinitely more preferable for the goddess of maidens than the alternatives. Her honor demanded that the man who bedded her demonstrate responsibility for his actions and marry her if he was a boyfriend, as mortals dubbed courting these days. Her self-respect made the idea of a one-night stand abhorrent. The last possibility was something that she feared in her nightmares, like any women did when that topic came up. Artemis's stubbornness wanted to claim that she remembered this fact that night, and that she simply moved to protect Naruto because she would have an extremely hard time finding another guy who was halfway acceptable as a husband. Another part of Artemis realized what was happening to her, but the goddess wouldn't allow herself to voice the fact that she was too afraid to admit even in her head. That part of Artemis was the part that monitored her hunters when one of them was in danger of possibly breaking their oath. Despite some popular rumors among the mythological inclined, Artemis did not kick a hunter out if they started to develop feelings for someone. Such things were very rare, but not entirely unavoidable with the hunter's nomadic lifestyle. Not even her hunters could control their hearts and completely block out Aphrodite and Eros's influence. Artemis only expelled a hunter if they acted on such feelings, since it was by acting that they broke their oath to her. If she noted a hunter who was starting to have feelings for someone, she'd help the hunter through the issue. Not that anyone outside the hunt realized that, since people only talked about the rare fallen hunters in myths and gossip. Percy was shaken awake when the van hit a speed bump. He blinked his eyes in confusion as the last thing he remembered was the school building shaking and then a ceiling tile falling towards him. Percy quickly spotted his pal Grover sitting in the seat next to him, and he blurted out, "What's going on, Grover?" Grover bleated out in surprise and then turned to look at his friend. "You're awake, Percy? I thought with that hit to the head that you'd be out for a few more hours." With a confused look on his face, Percy asked, "What happened, Grover, and where are we?" None of this was making any sense to the clueless half-blood. The still disguised satyr chuckled nervously and said, "Well, you see, Percy, there was an incident at school about 2 hours ago, and everyone had to be sent home." Naruto turned around in his chair so that Percy could see his head and cut in. "Grover, stop trying to hide what really happened. The proverbial house has already fallen, so it's time Dorothy here realizes that Kansas is long gone." Naruto paused for a second and focused his attention on Percy. "Hello, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, your most likely cousin and the backup Chiron called in when your school was attacked by a dragon." Percy's eyes bulged in shock when he heard Naruto say that. "What? How could the school be attacked by a dragon? They aren't." The younger demigod was cut off by a glare from Naruto. The older demigod quickly started to explain things to Percy. "Yes, dragons are real. Regular mortals only know about them in myths because dragons, along with everything else that can be regarded as mythical, are typically hidden from their sight. That monster that attacked you on that school trip of yours was an example of how mythological things typically hide among mortals." Naruto paused to give a heated glare to Chiron. Hera's son loved and greatly respected his uncle. The ageless centaur had ensured that the vast majority of half-bloods survived and lived full lives. However, Naruto wanted to know what the Tartarus he was thinking leaving Percy in Yancy after the monster attack at the museum. Basic Protection Detail 101 Lesson 1 stated that if the principal is attacked, you get the principal to a safe location. Chiron at least had the decency to look embarrassed as his nephew glared at him. Given the dragon attack, Chiron had to admit that he had been a little careless in watching over Percy's safety after the Fury attack. In his defense, keeping a half-blood sent weak while educating them about the basics of the mythological world was a sound tactic that had worked very well in the past. Chiron also knew that he was one of the best fighters one could find outside of gods, and he was very knowledgeable about almost every beast that would want to attack a half-blood. Most low-level monsters tended to avoid being in the same area he was in, deeming it too much trouble to go after a half-blood under his protection. How was he to know that Taichi would throw him a curveball in the form of that Zemi? Percy followed Naruto's glare, and his eyes bulged out in shock when he saw a centaur driving the van. His shock only increased when he got a look at the centaur's face and blurted out, "Mr. Brunner?" Naruto shot his uncle an amused grin and said, "Interesting cover name, Chiron." He then turned back to look at Percy and said, "Yes, we are in a car being driven by a centaur. The only fact about this that is of any real importance is that it is proof you have left that nice cozy box you called reality behind and have entered Wonderland. Now focus on me and what I have to tell you, because it is very important for your future safety. The gods and monsters that Chiron was teaching you about all year in school are real. Like me, you are lucky or unlucky enough to be a half-blood, a being that in older times was more popularly known as a demigod. Don't bother trying to deny it, Percy. Everyone who knows about the mythical side of the world can figure out what you are. ADHD and dyslexia together are a strong sign to those in the know. Mystical creatures, especially the hostile ones typically called monsters, can smell your non-human half. Others like myself who have a gift for sensing the world around us can pick up the divine tint in your presence, which signifies your mixed blood. Denying the truth or pretending that this is all some weird dream does you no good and will actually hurt you. The sooner you accept this, the sooner you can get over it and start preparing to live the rest of your life." Chiron coughed, and then spoke up, "Naruto, I think you're being a little too forceful in your approach in explaining things to Percy. We are talking about a fundamental change in how young Mr. Jackson understands and views the world. Such a paradigm change is inherently very stressful and confusing. It's even more so when one considers the exact nature that forced this early revelation before he could be properly prepared." Naruto rolled his eyes and replied, "If Dorothy here needs to have his mental circuit breakers reset once I'm done giving him the 411, I'll just throw him into the lake at camp to wake him back up." As someone who has gone through several earth-shattering paradigm changes, I can tell you that the slow and gentle approach does not work very well. It's better to quickly go about it like ripping off a band-aid. Besides, what other choice do you have but to tell him everything now since he's dragon bait? Are you going to keep him locked up in the big house for the next month and introduce him one by one to every nymph, satyr, half-blood, and harpy in camp? A small smirk appeared on Naruto's face when he saw Chiron blush slightly. Percy reached his breaking point and started to unbuckle his seatbelt. He wanted out of this crazy van and back to sanity. Even dealing with smelly Gabe was preferable at the moment for Percy than dealing with this insanity. At least with smelly Gabe, Percy knew when to hide and how to roll with the punches. Perhaps if he was really lucky, Percy tried to rationalize to himself, he would wake up and realize that this was just a dream. Just as Percy was about to completely undo his seatbelt, Naruto sprang into action. Naruto shoved his cousin back into his seat, redid Percy's seatbelt, and then pulled out a pocket knife. Before Grover or Chiron could even register what Naruto had done, the older half-blood used his pocket knife on Percy to create a shallow cut that barely drew blood. Naruto quickly closed up his pocket knife and wanted to shake his head at Percy wincing and grabbing his arm. How could such a small and shallow cut bother the boy? There was barely any blood coming from the cut. Tartarus, Naruto had gotten worse cuts from underbrush when going through wooded areas. Naruto glared at Percy and firmly said, "As that little cut I just gave you proves, this is all real. If you want to live beyond your next birthday, it is imperative that you listen to what I have to say and accept it. You don't have to like it. Tartarus, there are many facts about the real world that people hate when they learn about them, but whether or not you like something doesn't change the fact that it exists. You are a half-blood like me. Your father is a god, although we do not know who he is at the moment. Because of your divine blood you will have access to abilities that mortals do not. However, you will also have to be on your guard against monster attacks. All of the monsters Chiron covered this year with you exist for real and they constantly reform themselves. Sadly, monsters and half-bloods have been feuding for millennia. Monsters attack us partly in revenge for our older siblings killing them in the past, and partly as preemptive strike against half-bloods trying to kill them for a quest. A dragon attacked Yancy, apparently homing in on your half-blood scent. Because of this, you're being taken back to Camp Half-Blood now for survival training instead of waiting a few months until the summer session starts. While I cannot say this for sure, you're probably going to have to pass some sort of competency test before anyone will let you out of Camp Half-Blood. If we didn't, then we might as well kill you ourselves. At least then you'd die less painfully than from a monster attack. There are monsters that can swallow you in one bite. As a person who has been swallowed by and escaped from a giant snake, I can testify that you really don't want to die in that manner." The van stopped at a stoplight, allowing Chiron to pull out a small water bottle that the van's owner had set in the door and hand it to Percy. He then spoke up and said, "While I find Naruto's words to be heavy-handed, Percy, you should understand where he is coming from. Even a regular trained half-blood has to be on guard most of the time to protect themselves. For someone like you who is currently untrained and who unfortunately has a very strong scent, the risk of being attacked is much worse. Why don't you have some water and enjoy the ride to camp for the time being? I promise that we will ensure that you have everything you need to be safe soon enough." Percy hesitantly accepted the water from Chiron and looked down at his feet. The van jolted into motion as soon as the light turned green, splashing a little bit of water onto Percy's arm. Chiron observed the splash out of the corner of his eye using the rearview mirror. His eyes narrowed when he saw the small cut on Percy's arm disappear. As he feared, the water had healed Percy when it spilled slightly as he intended it to do. Only one godly lineage could bestow that kind of healing with just a few drops of water. Unfortunately, that meant that Percy's presence signaled bad or worse events coming on the horizon at camp depending on his place in that lineage. Gabe Ugliano was in an extremely foul mood and had been hitting the booze early today. That was never a good combo, as Sally Jackson had learned over the years she had unfortunately been married to Gabe. Many stuck with an abusive husband would think that was either somehow all their fault, or they would be praying for him to change back into the man they knew he once was again. Sally just stoically endured Gabe's tempers and did her best to avoid his attention when he wasn't in a semi-civil mood. She had been well aware that Gabe was poor excuse of a man when she met him and accepted putting up with him in order to spend more time with Percy in relative safety. She never prayed about her marriage or about Gabe in general, as she was worried about attracting Hera's attention. The myths were quiet on Hera's attitudes towards her other siblings' illegitimate children outside of her opinion of her husband's infidelities. Still, Sally figured that it would be better to cautious and not risk a goddess's wrath. Suddenly, the TV show Gabe was watching was cut off as an emergency news broadcast was put on. The announcer on TV bowed his head and said, "Sorry for interrupting your regular broadcast. However, it is my duty to inform you all that there has been a terrorist attack that has recently occurred here in New York State. This is the second major terrorist attack against the United States this decade." A picture of the smoking rubble of Yancey Academy appeared on the TV next to the news anchorman. Just over an hour ago, the prestigious private boarding school Yancey Academy was destroyed by a series of car bombs. Preliminary investigators have not been able to determine more than that from the attack yet. Unfortunately, 13 children and teachers at the academy have been killed in the attack and over 4 dozen more have been rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Names. The announcer's statement was cut off by Gabe changing the channel to try and find a sports game to watch. Seriously, who cares if a bunch of snobbish little shits were dead? Sally shocked Gabe by grabbing for the remote and trying to turn the channel back to the news. Percy went to Yancey, and she needed to know how he was doing. Gabe saw red and punched Sally in the face, knocking her down on the floor. He got out of his chair and roared with his fists ready for another strike, "Shut up, you stupid bitch. I'm the man of the house." Gabe was cut off from saying more by a kunai that sailed through the nearby window and embedded itself in his chest, piercing his heart. Gabe collapsed like a sack of potatoes, and Naruto teleported into the room onto the pig's chest just after the swine hit the floor. Sally watched in shock as Naruto took $2 coins out of his wallet, opened Gabe's mouth, and placed the coins in the dead man's mouth. Naruto quickly closed Gabe's mouth and said, "Sharon, please accept this payment to carry this man's shade swiftly across the river so that he might be judged for his actions in life." Naruto knew that he'd later regret taking Gabe's life, although he didn't feel anything but disgust for the man at the moment. Culturally, the elemental nations took a very dim view on spousal abuse, and that was magnified in the shinobi villages. While wives were traditionally subordinate to their husbands among the nobility, husbands were expected to care for and protect their wives. To mistreat, let alone abuse one's wife, was a massive dishonor that stained a man's personal honor and the honor of his entire clan. Among the shinobi, honor wasn't nearly as stressed, but they also worried about clan honor. The dim view of spousal abuse was magnified among shinobi because of the expectation that one's spouse would help them and protect their family while they were away. The fact that any kunoichi could permanently remove those who went against social conventions kept any would-be deviants strictly in line. As Hera's son, Naruto had an especial distaste for spousal abuse. With Gabe dead, Naruto quickly sheathed his kunai and then held both hands out in front of him so that Sally could see his empty hands. Thank Taichi, he had noticed the compasses reacting to Percy's blood when he went to clean his pocket knife. Naruto had gotten Sally's residence from Chiron, saying that he wanted to double-check to make sure she was safe from any monsters noticing Percy's lingering scent. In the back of Naruto's mind, he wondered why his compass didn't react to Percy's presence nearly as well as it did to Sally's, which it reacted to as designed. Perhaps the ichthor in the boy's blood was masking the Selkie blood? That was something for him to think about in the future. "Don't worry, Mrs. Jackson. I'm a half-blood and I'm here to help you." Naruto paused for a moment and then added, "Don't worry about your son. We got Percy out Yancey during the attack and have safely gotten him to Camp Half-Blood." Sally frowned as she looked at the unknown to her half-blood. She was shocked how he had appeared after killing Gabe. Not that she was particularly upset at Gabe's demise. The man's only good quality was that his scent was able to protect her son for all these years. She had seen drug dealers and gang leaders around the neighborhood who were better men than Gabe, and those were some pretty nasty individuals. Sally looked up at Naruto and asked with just a hint of nervousness, "Who are you and why are you here?" Naruto gave her his usual friendly smile as he got off of Gabe's corpse. Personal opinions of the man aside, Naruto was not about to disrespect a dead man in any way if he could avoid it. He calmly said, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Officially, I'm here to check on your safety. A dragon recently attacked Yancey, apparently drawn in by your son's half-blood scent. I and several others wanted to check on you to make sure that you were safe from any monster attacks as well. Unofficially, I'm here to fulfill a quest given to me by your great-grandfather Connor MacLeod to ensure your safety. Your son isn't the only one to have a mythically inclined family tree.